Chapter 302. When Fire Qilin couldn't figure out a problem, it liked to pluck its own fur. Every time it did so, the creatures hidden underground would tremble. As a result, the flowers, birds, fishes, and insects within a few hundred miles of the inferior compound all jumped up and shouted at Beligaju. Please quickly take your pet away. If a single strand of its fur fell on them, it could burn them to death. Have some self-awareness. Hellion Vivian sat on the second floor of the tea house and put down the armament that Jing Wushuang gave her. She smiled faintly and said, "This thing is not bad. It is indeed made by young Master Wushuang. I really didn't expect that one day I would be praised by the boss of Profound Heaven. I thought that in your eyes, we are all stubborn old antiques." Jing Wushuang lowered his eyes and drank a mouthful of tea. His long sleeves fluttered, bringing out a faint medicinal fragrance. Hellion Wei Wei stretched and smiled slyly. That's just an excuse to motivate the employees. Profound Heaven is still a new armament company. Compared to you guys, we have to have some other unique features to capture the market. Being your enemy is really a headache. Jing Wushuang seemed to be quite helpless, his transparent fingertips supporting his forehead. Hellion Vivian smiled and slightly narrowed her eyes with a bit of laziness. A gust of night wind blew, and a few pear blossoms fell on her eyebrows and eyelashes. Jing Wushuang looked at her and curved his thin lips. He reached out and wanted to brush away the petals on her head. After interacting with each other once or twice, Hellion Wei Wei didn't evade. She only watched as he extended a hand that was as smooth as jade in front of her. Then he paused and immediately withdrew his hand. His face revealed an extremely faint smile as if he was looking at someone. Hellion Vivian followed his gaze and slowly looked downstairs. She saw the white-clothed, black-haired Beligaju standing there coldly. His long and narrow peach blossom eyes flashed with a cold light as cold as frost. Beligaju looked at this scene, his pair of eyes floating up and down. The emotions that were rarely stirred up were now raging violently in the bottom of his heart, as if they were about to burst out of his throat. Almost instinctively, Beligaju's slender and cold fingertips touched the white skin of his throat. He exerted a little force and the external pain slightly balanced the burning heat inside. After that, he indifferently withdrew his gaze from Hellion Wei Wei's body and strolled into the long alley. Hellion Vivian also guessed the same. It was time to talk to the other party about terminating the contract. The night grew darker. The Fire Qilin sized up Beligaju's expression. "Master, bang." Without waiting for Fire Qilin to finish speaking, Beligaju punched the wall. He did not do anything for the past 2 days. Every day when the sun went down he would wait for her. She, on the other hand, had turned a deaf ear to his words time and time again. The thin fog dispersed. Hellion Vivian only drank 2 cups of tea with Jing Wushuang. The main point was to talk about the disassembly of armaments. However, Hellion Vivian did not hand over all her secrets. Some things only appeared in modern times. If she said, it would inevitably cause some trouble. Jing Wushuang was indeed a person who made people feel comfortable to get along with. Young Master Yen Ryu was probably talking about this kind of person. Hellion Vivian thought as she walked in the direction of the inferior compound. The night was quieter and the echoes of footsteps in the alley were very clear. Hellion Vivian could hear the sound of footsteps following behind her. It followed her and stopped, rising and falling at the same time. Hellion Vivian guessed that it must be Shadow, who had been transferred away before, who had returned. She walked all the way to the door and suddenly realized that the sound of footsteps had disappeared. Hellion Wei Wei wrinkled her eyebrows and stood there for a while before finally turning her head and looking into the distance. After seeing that there wasn't a soul in sight, her eyes narrowed again. Just as she was about to push open the door, her head was covered by a white robe without any impurities. Beligaju's voice sounded coldly. "You're having a good time. So happy that you don't even want to go home." Hellion Vivian wanted to pull down the robe, but that person had already pinned her to the wall. "Do you believe that if you dare to move I'll feed Qingzhan to Qilin? Fire Qilin." "Wait, I'm not a dog." Hellion Vivian could only stay still and look at the man's long legs under the robe. Beligaju carried her all the way into the room. However, Hellion Vivian felt that the situation was not right. That day he was the one who said whatever. Moreover, why didn't he look for his personal servant girl but came to her place to stop her? Hellion Vivian thought for a while, then pulled the robe away and asked, "Why are you here?" "I've been waiting for you for 2 days." Beligaju looked at her and his voice was cold. Hellion Vivian was confused. You've been waiting for me for 2 days? I told you to come and find me at night. Bailey Jiaju smiled faintly, bringing out an evil aura that made people terrified. But it's very obvious that you've already forgotten. Hellion Wei Wei paused for a moment. I also want to talk to you about this matter. Talk about what? Baligaju lifted her chin with his fingers and looked at her coldly. Before you talk, I advise you to think about whether I'll like what you're going to say next. Hellion Vivian smiled. Don't worry, you'll definitely like to hear it. It's about setting you free. Setting me free? Baligaju's fingers slowly clenched. He wanted to hear how she was going to set him free. Hellion Wei Wei sat up straight. Although she was still holding him in her arms, compared to before, it was obvious that there was a relative distance between them. I've thought about it. Now that the wedding is over, the retired emperor won't rush you too much. Your Highness can totally go and do your own things. When we were signing the contract, I anticipated many situations and felt that I could handle them. However, there was one thing that I neglected. This contract is very likely to affect other people. Fortunately, we both agreed that if I meet someone I like, the contract will automatically become invalid. Someone I like. Baligaju's eyes were completely cold. Are you talking about me or you? What? Is Jing Wushuang so good that you don't even want my help? Hellion Vivian was silent for a while, then raised her head and said, It has nothing to do with him. It's just that I thought about it. In this world, it's better to rely on yourself than anyone else, because other people can't be relied on. Moreover, I don't want to be anyone's shield. What do you mean? Baligaju faintly wrinkled his long eyebrows. What I mean is, don't you think that we've been quarreling every time we see each other? Actually, you don't have to be like this. If someone really comes back and wants to part ways with me, you can just tell me directly. She also had a debt of gratitude towards him. She was really annoyed by the dark shadows who were making a ruckus. It would be better for him to say it, that would make her feel better. Chapter 303. I'm not someone who doesn't know how to appreciate favors. Hellion Vivian continued, You don't have to beat around the bush and let the people around you tell you. Bang. Before she could finish speaking, Hellion Vivian felt a vibration in her ears. His black-gloved fist smashed against the wall. He didn't care about his bleeding fingers and slowly lowered his body. His mouth was smiling, but there was no warmth in his eyes. You are the first person who dared to part ways with this king, and the only one who survived. I'm just thinking of a solution. Hellion Vivian didn't change her expression. She had always believed that he was a reasonable person. Bailey Jiaju looked at the expression on her face. His complexion suddenly became a bit colder. And in the next second she saw Bailey Jiaju's hand swept in her direction with a ghostly speed. His half-narrowed eyes carried a cold, murderous intent. Following Yuan Ming's shout, Be careful. Hellion Vivian clenched her fist. Her hand didn't stop moving. Her palm moved and her finger moved to the side. Half a second later, the sound of a sword piercing through flesh echoed in her ears, coldly exploding in the air. Hellion Vivian stared blankly at Baligaju in front of her. The dagger in her hand had pierced through the man's shoulder blade. Behind her, a strange-looking demonic beast struggled with its face, and then completely vanished into nothingness. Yuan Ming held his forehead and looked up at the sky. Woman, I told you to be careful behind you. Hellion Vivian didn't say anything. She only looked at the man's bleeding wound and her mind went blank for a moment. Then she saw the man's lips suddenly pull back into that familiar lazy and charming arc. It was low and pleasing to the ear like spring water flowing under ice. There was a trace of imperceptible anger in the coldness. His voice was cold and somewhat forceful. I can stop the contract, but you're mine. I have to take you away. Having heard what was said, Wei Wei stared blankly and couldn't help but somewhat laugh. This kind of "you're my toy, even if you're broken, you're still mine" tone really didn't seem like something the aloof and remote third prince would say. Baligaju ignored her. His jade-like hand brushed past several major acupuncture points on Hellion Vivian's body like lightning. With a light flick of his finger, the dagger that pierced through his body was easily broken like a fragile grass root. He didn't even look at the wound on his body and carried the person in his arms horizontally. Along the way he covered Hellion Vivian with his windbreaker, not letting anyone's heads out. Some students who came out at night didn't know what's in his arms. After all, they were far apart. The also Baligaju's eyes. Before the students could react, the person in front of them disappeared. They could only faintly see the back of a figure hidden in the clouds. When they entered the room, Beligaju casually threw the windbreaker covering her head to the ground. Then he pressed Hellion Vivian against the wall and kissed her. The man's clear breath suddenly approached. It was like a lotus flower or snow, intoxicating. The domineering and passionate kiss was mixed with uncontrollable anger. It was so passionate that it was suffocating. He clasped her slender waist with one hand and pinched her chin with the other. He kissed her deeply as if he was forcing her. It was that kind of suffocating feeling again. From the entrance to the inner room, Hellion Wei Wei didn't have enough time to unseal the acupoints on her body before she was directly put down on the soft couch by him. Her breath was filled with the other's clear and cold sandalwood fragrance. "Woman, since he's taking the initiative, why don't you just follow him and take the opportunity to cultivate more?" Yuan Ming's noisy voice still sounded in her ears. Hellion Vivian directly cut off the telepathic communication with him and locked him in the Xuanhuan space. Only then did she feel a little more peaceful. At this time her acupuncture points were opened. She directly pressed the man's hand and looked at Beligaju with some difficulty in breathing. Beligaju's eyes seemed to have fallen into an ice cellar because of this silent rejection. There was a deep madness hidden in his eyes. His originally black pupils gradually contracted and a cold light appeared, as if they were about to turn into a pair of demon eyes. It was almost as if he couldn't control his instincts. Hellion Vivian saw it very clearly. That pair of indifferent eyes were now glowing with a light that was clearly suppressed and crazy. It was so crazy that it was almost twisted. Hellion Vivian felt that her situation was a little dangerous. She wanted to speak, but she was stopped by the other party's smile. "If I were you, I would choose to shut up at this time." As he spoke, Beligaju's knees slowly moved, and then he stepped over the straight long legs of the person on the bed and covered her body. "Why do you always reject me?" When did she reject him? Fine, it was true. But if anyone pounced on her, she would lie down obediently. Didn't this feel a little ridiculous? It was too ridiculous. "I clearly gave you many chances, but you didn't learn at all. You insisted that I lock your claws so that you would be at peace." "What chance?" He said it as if he didn't lock her up. Did he forget the bet on the day of the wedding? "What did you promise before coming up the mountain? You made me wait for so long. Dear, if you're not happy, why can't I wait for you for 2 days? Speak." Hellion Vivian. Who was the one who told her to shut up in the first place? "Are you planning to discuss this with me while bleeding?" Hellion Wei Wei sighed. Her hand was still on Bailey Jiaju's wrist. She flipped over in the air and flipped down from the soft couch. After that, she familiarly pulled out a white handkerchief from the drawer of the desk at the side. At this time, Beligaju had already sat up. His holy white robe fluttered slightly and the light in his eyes gradually calmed down. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes and pulled open his collar. She first looked at the wound. Then she lowered her head and wiped it with cotton wool. She sprinkled the powder on it. "Raise your arm." Beligaju was quite easy to talk to sometimes. His handsome side profile was quite good. Hellion Wei Wei looked at his slightly wrinkled long eyebrows expression. The corners of her mouth curved up. Then she tore the white handkerchief into strips and skillfully tied a butterfly knot. What was that thing just now? Unexpectedly, she didn't feel the slightest bit that someone was approaching her. A hidden beast. Bailey Jiaju sized her up with a glance. His tone was as indifferent as water. "That's why, as a married woman, don't go out at night and casually meet other people. If you're tainted with something unclean, don't even think about keeping your life." Hellion Wei Wei felt some pain in her knees. Why was it that every time His Highness spoke he was able to link this and that together? But why is there such a thing in the academy? Beligaju slowly adjusted his collar with his slender fingers. His eyes darkened. Something must have happened in the forest of fantasy. Hellion Vivian listened quietly. Her eyes were clear as if she had thought of a good idea. Just as she was about to stand up, she was pulled back by the man. Chapter 304. Only to hear a caw sound. She wore a chain of exquisite workmanship on her wrist. It was the forbidden martial black iron lock, a divine weapon specially used to imprison martial artists. It was said that there were at most 3 in the entire Dragon War Empire and they were priceless. Hellion Vivian was a martial artist, so she was most familiar with the use of this kind of thing. Was he really planning to lock her up? Hellion Vivian just wrinkled her eyebrows. A slight chill came from her wrist and his fingers slowly rubbed her skin. Look, it suits you so well. His voice was still low and calm, and it even had a bit of elegance and leisure like the spring breeze. However, Hellion Wei detected a sense of danger from this calm and refined voice. She lowered her eyes and her voice became cold. No one would like this kind of fit, Your Highness. Is this how you treat your ally? It seems that I still have value, and it's hard for Your Highness to use such an expensive chain to lock me up. The current situation was not the result she wanted to see. But what gave her a headache was that a certain highness seemed to have a particularly serious hobby in this area. She reckoned that only he could give people a kind of inviolable, cold and handsome look when he was using an iron lock to lock people up. Was there a mistake? In the end he was the one doing bad things. Hellion Vivian ridiculed in her heart, but she was not willing to go to the point of going against Beligaju. What else do you need me to do? It's better to say it directly and we can end it happily. Hellion Vivian thought so in her heart, so she also said her thoughts. She felt that it would be better to say it out loud. However, she didn't expect that after she finished speaking, the look in Bailey Jiaju's eyes was even colder than before. Heh. And happily. He looked up and saw that her expression was very calm, as if she wanted to negotiate with him peacefully. For a moment he only felt that it was incomparably dazzling. In her eyes there was no him. There had always been no him. Beligaju curled his lips into a smile, but that smile did not reach his eyes. Instead it was a cold expression on his face. There will be no happy ending. The things that I want can only stay by my side. So Your Highness used this method? Hellion Vivian tugged at the iron lock on her wrist and raised her eyebrows mockingly. Beligaju's back stiffened, and his hands slowly clenched into fists under the blanket. Since when did he need to use such a method to keep a woman? Even if this was not in line with his usual style of doing things. The War Dragon Empire's most respected royal family descendant, the insufferably arrogant royal family, when was there anything that he could not obtain? However, Hellion Vivian was such an exception. He was confident that he could control everything, but when it came to her, he was helpless. What? Do you think this method is despicable? His voice was low and deep, but it also carried a cold smile. A light breeze blew through his black hair, covering his beautiful eyes. I am such a despicable person. I am fundamentally different from the deskmate you imagined. Now that you finally understand, you want to escape? Ah. Hearing the word deskmate, Hellion Vivian could not help but look into those deep and intense black eyes. The usual transparent feeling disappeared and was replaced by a bone-piercing coldness. She could even clearly feel the coldness when the man approached her, as well as the cold breath he exhaled. Hellion Vivian was stunned. Her outstretched hand froze in midair. She did not know why, but she felt that in that extremely cold voice, there was a wetness that made people care. It was as if he was desperate to the extreme and it made people feel lonely. Behind him, countless oil lamps fell to the ground. The wooden table shook violently because of him and the wind whistled. He was angry. Maybe this time he really wanted to strangle her to death. But after waiting for a while, the boiling anger did not burn her body. Fire Qilin was standing outside the door. He knew better than anyone that the vibration from the blood could burst out from the blood vessels. It was so hot that it could almost burn the heart. He did not know what happened, but the only thing they were sure of was that this burning feeling came from his angry master. In the darkness, the door and windows in the room made a clang, clang, clang sound. A strong wind swept in, whistling like a wild beast outside the room. Suddenly, a huge gust of wind blew in front of them. White lightning flashed in the sky, and the glass window had already hit the window frame heavily. Beligaju was standing under that window. Hellion Vivian was shocked. She looked up and did not care whether he was angry or not. He leaped over and forcefully swapped the two of them. At the same time she heard a clang sound behind her, followed by a large area of brittle shattering. Only the sharp edge of the glass window was left. It firmly hit Hellion Vivian's arched back. Under the lightning, the floor was full of broken glass shards. Beligaju was stunned. The wind and clouds stopped. He looked at her and forgot to move for a moment. Hellion Vivian supported herself with one hand. The iron chain made a sound and she shouted at Beligaju, "If you have the ability to call the wind and summon the rain, then you have the ability to dodge. Bastard, do you think you can be willful just because you are handsome?" Beligaju reacted at this time. He hugged her, and as if he was anxious, his fingers touched her back. Hellion Vivian was shocked. She pressed his hand again. "What are you doing? Take your hand away." These words could not be more overbearing. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Was this his attitude towards his savior? However, the gentleness of his fingers did not match his tone at all. Hellion Vivian's back was originally fine. After all, she had done a lot of training. She knew what posture to use to block a heavy object when it fell. It would minimize the damage. But he took off her clothes and examined her as if she were a product of daily use. Hellion Vivian did not know whether to laugh or cry. As if he had finally finished examining her, Beligaju looked at the smooth and white back in front of him. Then very gently he pulled her into his arms. His chin seemed to be resting on top of her head. There was a hard-to-detect deep voice in his voice. "Wait for this king here." Hellion Vivian looked at him as if he was about to leave. Her eyebrows raised again. At this point he still did not plan to untie the thing on her hand. Beligaju seemed to be in a hurry. He waved his sleeve and ordered the shadow outside the door. "Look after the princess." Yes. Shadow's face was filled with astonishment from just now. Until now he didn't know what to feel. Seeing his master quickly disappear into the night, he couldn't help but murmur. Looking at His Highness' expression, he should have guessed that Miss Yun has returned. Hellion Vivian was lying on the soft couch. Hearing the movement outside, she laughed. So it was like that. His Highness' reaction was a bit too slow. Hellion Vivian mockingly moved the iron chain on her wrist. Her eyes looked at the dangling hair ornament on the ground. Chapter 305. Outside the room in the darkness. Fire Qilan's figure could be vaguely seen. Beligaju glanced at him and said in a calm voice, "How many more hidden beasts are there in the academy?" "There are still a few." Fire Qilan lowered its eyes. "It's almost certain that Hellion Weiwei's body has been possessed, because the hidden ground beasts will only approach and attack souls that have occupied other people's bodies. Then they will pull them out of their original bodies and drag them underground. Someone brought the hidden ground beasts here and they must be targeting her." Beligaju's eyes turned cold. His long black hair fell down along the side of his face, making his cold and beautiful eyes look even more beautiful and murderous. Fire Qilan continued, "Master, why didn't you tell Hellion Vivian that you used the forbidden black iron lock to lock her up because it can avoid being found by hidden beasts?" Bailey Jiaju casually glanced at the Fire Qilan and said, "Because that is only a small part of the reason." As he said that, he sneered and said, "Go and find those bugs for me first." "Yes." Fire Qilan's eyes lit up and suddenly turned into a divine beast. Like a whirlwind, it galloped in the dark night. Its speed was so fast that it was impossible to see its shadow. No one knew what was happening, because only beasts could feel the threat of an ancient divine beast. The hidden beasts that were searching for something near the inferior compound suddenly stopped and wanted to run away. But how could Fire Qilan let them run away? This was a chance to show its might and majesty. Fire Qilan shook its smooth fur and narrowed its eyes. It paused and ran back and forth between the two corners of the northeast and northeast. It was having a lot of fun. So on this day many little beasts saw this scene. Boss Fire Qilan chased after those hidden beasts like a herd of sheep. Even when they went up to ask for a pet, Boss Fire Qilan ignored them. But this didn't stop them from worshipping their boss with all their hearts. Starry eyes. Beligaju frowned slightly. He really couldn't agree with the beauty of these beasts. As for the Fire Qilan, it seemed to have sensed the gazes of admiration around it. It puffed up its chest and chased after the crouching beasts even more vigorously, forcing them all in front of Beligaju. The crouching beast had a natural instinct for danger. However, there was still a human standing in their wake. Of course, they wouldn't pay much attention to it. They just wanted to scratch Beligaju to death with their claws. A total of 6 crouching beasts the size of wild wolves pounced toward Bailey Jiaju with murderous intents. Their eyes were blinding. Beligaju didn't even make a move. He just stood there elegantly in the dark. He frowned slightly and his long green robe fluttered. The crouching beasts seemed to have been punished severely. They were all bounced back to the ground, rolling back and forth in pain. They had no idea who they had offended. Beligaju walked over and looked around. His teeth bit off his black gloves and his thin lips gently spit out a string of cold. "There is one more." Indeed, there was one more. The crouching beasts were different from other beasts. They were the classic group of beasts. They liked to drag people's souls underground. Normally they wouldn't show themselves at all. During the day they would hide in the thick bushes and only move at night. When they moved they would listen to the command of the Beast King. And now that Beast King had not appeared yet. Beligaju narrowed his eyes. Suddenly he reached out his hand and a smaller beast than the other crouching beasts appeared in front of him. Its entire body was black. However, its pair of frightening white eyes were too evil. If a normal person saw it they would definitely be shocked. This was the Beast King of the Crouching Beasts, a top-level beast. The Beast King of the Crouching Beasts clearly didn't expect that a human would be able to see through its disguise. It was so shocked that its heart was beating wildly. However, it wasn't scared like the other crouching beasts. Because in its eyes, no matter how powerful the other party was, it was still just a human. However, in the next moment it felt regret. Because behind that person stood the ancient divine beast that could absolutely proclaim itself as the king of the world, the Fire Qilin. The Beast King couldn't help but curl up into a ball. Its face was filled with unprecedented respect and fear. Only then did it seriously examine the man's face. Who are you? You think you're worthy of asking for my name? The corners of Bailey Jiaju's mouth were still curved. His face was as handsome as a god's as he looked down at the magical beast from above. His eyes, which were covered with golden lines, narrowed. The Beast King looked at those familiar eyes and turned around. Its sharp claws kept scratching the ground in an attempt to escape. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of footsteps behind it echoed in the empty night. It was elegant and gentle but bloodthirsty. The Beast King knew that it couldn't escape. It knelt on the ground and began to beg for mercy. I beg you, please spare me. I was also ordered by someone else. Oh. Beligaju seemed to have heard the funniest joke. You want me to spare you? The Beast King's eyes turned. I can tell you who ordered me to do this. I don't want to hurt anyone. It was you humans who brought me in. Is that so? Beligaju's expression was indifferent as he stopped in his tracks. The Beast King nodded furiously, but its claws were exposed. Yes. Heh. Beligaju curled his thin lips and grabbed its claws. Do you really think that I would believe your words? Why would a demonic beast listen to a human's orders? Unless that person is your master. The only condition for a demonic beast to make an agreement with a human is that it cannot betray the other party. Creak. The crisp sound of bones cracking could be heard. In an instant, the Beast King, who was staggering on the ground, seemed to remember something. It looked at that handsome face and its eyes shook violently. This man, was it him? No. Impossible. The Beast King wanted to say something, but before it could open its mouth, its neck was broken by the man's grip. The Beast King's head tilted to one side. Before its eyes lost its luster, it was full of regret. Bailey Jiaju retracted his hand. The light in his eyes was as cold as the stars. His surroundings seemed to be emitting a radiance similar to the bright moon. Within a radius of a few miles, not a single beast dared to approach him. Except for the Fire Qilin. It stood behind the man, its big paws stepping on the ground as it said in a deep voice, Master, this Beast King is able to speak, which means that it must have drunk the blood of the person who raised it. However, the person who can make the crouching ground beast work for him is not easy to deal with. Master, I have a premonition, something must have come to White Academy. Bailey Jiaju didn't say anything, but that pair of pitch-black eyes were much deeper than before. The night wind blew. Hellion Vivian held the dangling hair ornament in her right hand. The delicate end was aimed at the lock cylinder. She tested it back and forth and a thin layer of sweat overflowed from her forehead. Suddenly her eyes lit up. Chapter 306. The iron chain fell. Hellion Vivian turned her wrist but did not feel much pain. She glanced at the expensive iron chain and decided to just throw it away since it would be a waste. When the door was opened, and Ying's body froze. Hellion Vivian looked at him lazily. He didn't realize it just now. Now that he knows Yun Biluo is back, he won't have the time to care about me. And Ying, do you want to fight or let me go? And Ying looked at Hellion Vivian and did not know how to answer the question. He just blocked her way respectfully. Princess, I'm sorry, I can't let you go. He had to obey his master's order. Hellion Vivian smiled and said handsomely, Do you think you can stop me? Princess, please don't make things difficult for me. Shadow had always been the taciturn type. Facing Wei Wei, he didn't know what to do. Apart from his highness, The bigger reason was that he didn't want to hurt this girl who was different from him. Hellion Vivian's eyes flashed. Well, it's not easy for you. I'll wait for Beligaju to come back. Thank you, princess. And Ing was still very vigilant. He stared at Hellion Vivian and waited for her to close the door. Hellion Vivian chuckled and walked forward slowly. And Ing looked at her back and was on guard. When he was about to reach out, he heard the sound of wind and subconsciously blocked it. The sparks caused by the friction between the martial arts were reflected in Hellion Vivian's eyes. She curled her lips and smiled at Ing. Good skill. And Ing did not say anything. But Hellion Wei paused for a moment and moved her fingers. The other end of the umbrella emitted bursts of smoke. And Ing wanted to hold his breath, but it was too late. His vision turned black and he fell to the ground with a thud. Hellion Wei took back the umbrella and looked at the unconscious shadow. The corners of her mouth carried an evil aura. Do you think it's just an ordinary umbrella? As she spoke, she bent down and dragged Shadow into the room. Because she was afraid of provoking His Highness mysophobia, she was very considerate and didn't put Shadow on a chair, only letting him lean against the wall. After changing their outer garments and straightening their collars, they strolled out of the inferior compound. Outside the courtyard, there were still a few shadows hiding in various corners. Although they did not appear, Hellion Vivian could still feel the gazes around her. If she hadn't been wearing this set of clothes, she would have been surrounded the moment she left the hospital. Hellion Vivian was good at disguising herself, so she didn't reveal any flaws along the way. After leaving the courtyard, she didn't hesitate and directly turned around to go to Tu Sufeng's courtyard. Hellion Vivian was not worried whether Tu Sufeng was asleep or not. As the dean of White Academy, that person had always slept very late. In addition, he had to take care of a child. As soon as Hellion Vivian walked into the brightly lit courtyard, she saw the little seventh prince with a stack of wooden bowls on his head. The little seventh prince looked at her and blinked. He was very calm. Third sister-in-law. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. What are you doing? I was caught stealing meat. Speaking of this, the little seventh prince seemed to be very upset. Even his cute little eyebrows were wrinkled. Hellion Vivian glanced at his appearance. How long more do you want to wear this? The dean didn't say. The little seventh prince watched as Hellion Vivian took a step forward. He also took a step forward, his short and thick legs swaying. Hellion Vivian reached out and took down the wooden bowls on his head. Where's the dean? He's sighing. The little seventh prince seriously threw all the wooden bowls into the ancient well. I've been too naughty recently. He can't explain it to Imperial Grandfather. Hellion Vivian. You also know? A helpless light laugh came from behind. Hellion Wei looked back and saw Tu Sufeng, who was wearing a long robe, slowly walking over. He still didn't have the slightest change. He was elegant and upright. The years had accumulated too much brilliance on his body. Just looking at him was enough to make people believe in him. In his hand was a steaming hot meat bun. There was no need to guess to know who he was giving it to. The little seventh prince naively ran over and took the meat bun. He opened his mouth and took a bite. As he ate, he said, I'm just a bit more competitive. You're just a little more competitive? Tu Sufeng's slender fingers rubbed his forehead. So competitive that you broke the arms of those young masters from the superior compound? The little seventh prince held the meat bun and seriously said, I was saving them. If they went to fight with third brother, their injuries would be even more serious. Tu Sufeng admitted that the little one's words were reasonable. Then he thought of those posts saying that the people the academy recently accepted were too unruly, and his head hurt even more. Not a single one can be worry-free. Especially that one who didn't care about anyone at all. What restraint was there to speak of? After the Yuan family stepped down, the Liang family squeezed in and mentioned the inferior compound by name. What they talked about was the problem with Beligaju. Those people still didn't know Beligaju's identity. Last time they wanted to rope him in, but how could the third prince go under these people's tutelage? Therefore, no matter if it was the Liang family or the great masters in the academy, they all sent one post after another to him. Fortunately, it was Tu Sufeng who was in charge. If it was someone else, they would have been unable to withstand the pressure. Such a person, the battle spirit forces couldn't possibly not accept him into the martial arts. Hellion Vivian curled her lips into a smile. She didn't beat around the bush and directly flashed the military seal in her hand. Tu Sufeng's eyes were slightly stunned. This is? I want to have a good talk with the dean about the Forest of Fantasy. Hellion Vivian kept the military seal and said, and about the internal specifications of the battle spirit forces. Tu Su Feng smiled. I don't know much about the battle spirit forces, but we can talk about the Forest of Fantasy. Hellion Vivian glanced at him. I have a piece of news that will affect the safety of the people in the capital city. I can only tell the people in the battle spirit forces. The little seventh prince listened to the conversation between the two adults at the side. He took a big bite of the meat bun, then opened his eyes wide and continued to watch. Tu Su Feng didn't fuss over the girls this time. Instead he looked at Hellion Vivian and smiled. You're really smart. Come, you're the second person who came looking for me today. The first one is Yun Biluo. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Tu Su Feng smiled. It's her, but she didn't look in the right direction. Hellion Vivian didn't say anything else. She followed Tu Su Feng into the study room. Tu Su Feng skillfully turned the pen holder on the wooden table, and the wooden bookshelf opened to the left and right. A long and endless corridor appeared in front of Hellion Weiwei just like that. Chapter 307. Tu Su Feng took the oil lamp and raised it high with one hand. The sound of his footsteps echoed back and forth unhurriedly. White Academy was not what it is now a long time ago. No one knows that there is a huge palace hidden under its ground. This palace is where the battle spirit forces are located. As soon as he finished speaking, a loud boom was heard. The huge torches on both sides were lit. Hellion Vivian could see the reflection under her feet. The smooth marble floor showed the luxury of the owner who built this palace. There were a total of 38 huge stone pillars supporting the entire dome. Tu Su Feng smiled and pointed with her white hand. Look over there. Hellion Weiwei looked down and saw thousands of soldiers yelling something. Some were eating, some were wiping their weapons, and some were wiping their weapons. The scale was so big that it was shocking. This was not a palace, it was an underground ancient city. Hellion Weiwei turned her head around. Originally, she wanted to exchange a glance with the little seventh prince behind them to express her shock. She did not expect that the little seventh prince only had eyes for the braised pork in a soldier's bowl. This was enough. Although it's late, I still want to say welcome to the battle spirit forces. Tu Su Feng looked back with his slender figure. Wait a little longer, the new members who joined with you will arrive soon. Hellion Vivian crossed her arms. I thought the first person who found you would be rewarded. Otherwise, why would she be so enthusiastic? Of course there will be a reward. Tu Su Feng smiled gently. From now on, I will be your mentor. The others will have mentors who will be in charge of them. Hellion Vivian chuckled. What a great reward. They are here. Tu Su Feng looked out. A gap suddenly opened in a cave not far away. The moonlight shone in. Faintly, 4 figures walked in. Hellion Vivian frowned and looked over. Apart from Yun Biluo and the rest, there was a very handsome man. It was not an exaggeration to describe him as handsome. His skin was fairer than a woman's, but he did not look feminine at all. Instead, he gave off an enchanting charm. When the man saw her, he suddenly laughed. What a coincidence. He knew her? Hellion Vivian's eyes paused. How could she not remember seeing such a beautiful man? What? Don't you remember me? The man stroked his chin with a faint smile. Hellion Vivian looked at him seriously for a while. A blurry image flashed through her mind. Little tyrant? That's right. Your eyesight isn't too bad. As he spoke, the man lowered his head and looked at the tiny figure. Why is he here too? The little seventh prince narrowed his eyes. Cousin Hanyu, your family's spell has been broken? Hanyu lifted his chin and said, How is it? Isn't it cool? The little seventh prince scratched his bald head and sized him up. Hanyu straightened his back. Not bad, but not as good-looking as third brother. After saying that, the little seventh prince retracted his gaze, giving off a feeling of disdain. The corner of Hanyu's mouth twitched fiercely. Wei Wei restrained herself from laughing out loud. She also didn't know what His Highness did to the little tyrant that day at Armament City, to make him bear a grudge until now. It couldn't be that he also used iron chains or something to tie him to the bed. However, she could not be sure. After all, he even let him wear a dress. The seventh prince is still so likable. Yun Biluo walked over and looked at the little bald head who was full of vigor. The little one did not say anything. He had always adopted a silent and cold attitude towards people he was not familiar with. However, Yun Biluo was smart. No matter how the other party responded, she could always smile. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips and did not respond to anyone. Tu Feng listened to their conversation and said gently, "It seems that all of you know each other. That's easy. For a long time in the future all of you will be tested together. The test is divided into 3 parts. Those who pass the test will officially become a member of the Battle Spirit Forces. The test will take place in the White Academy. From now on, every minute and every second all of you will have to tighten your nerves. This test will be very cruel and may even take your life away. So if anyone wants to quit, you can say so now." No one spoke. Tu Feng smiled, "That's good. If there are no other objections, then each of you can follow the instructor to pick your own room. This room is not for you to sleep in. There will be things that you will need to use when carrying out missions." As he spoke, Tu Feng glanced at Hellion Vivian and the little 7th prince. "Both of you follow me." Hellion Vivian nodded and followed. When they brushed past each other, Yun Biluo smiled at her. Hellion Vivian had met such people before. They were polite and gentle, but it did not mean that they were friendly. On the contrary, one had to be wary of them. Third sister-in-law. The little 7th prince saw this and stopped in his tracks. He said in a fierce tone, "Don't talk to strangers. Third brother will be unhappy." Hellion Vivian was speechless. What was the feeling of being taught a lesson? Moreover, the one standing opposite is the one your third brother cares about. "Let's go." He waved his little sleeves. He could not be more domineering. Hellion Vivian followed him, amused. The little one paused for a moment before reaching out both of his hands toward her. Hellion Wei Wei bent down with a smile and lifted him up in her arms. The little one leaned his head on Hellion Vivian's shoulder. His eyes were still staring at Yun Biluo, full of warning. Yun Biluo tilted her head in confusion and laughed again. The little 7th prince did not speak. His face was cold. He did not like this woman. She acted as if she was very close to him. It was all because of third brother. The little one tilted his head and said to Hellion Vivian coolly, "If you meet such a woman in the future, just tell third brother directly. She can't cook anyway, so it's useless to keep her." Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. It seems that cooking is a very important skill. It can save one's life at critical moments, of course. The little one said seriously. Tu Feng sighed countless times while walking in front. "This foodie. We're here. Go in and see what you need." Tu Feng pushed open the wooden door with his slender fingers and stood sideways. The room was not very big, but it gave people a sense of dazzling luxury. Rows of exquisite accessories were placed on the sandalwood table, and a bronze mirror as tall as a person stood in the middle. On the left and right sides of the table, in addition to colorful ancient long dresses, there were also exquisite shawls and countless dangling ornaments. These were only the women's necessities. On the other side, there were men's long robes for various occupations from high-end to low-end. Everything was there. Chapter 308. After Hellion Wei Wei saw these things, she almost subconsciously thought of the room in young Master Tang's villa that was specially used to store disguise equipment. She could not help but raise her eyes to look at Tu Feng with admiration in her eyes. "These are all yours." Tu Feng picked up one of the dangling ornaments and then lightly turned it. Chua! A sound rang out. 3 silver needles were shot straight into the wall with extraordinary strength. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. "Not bad. Compared to your myriad manifestations umbrella, it's still a bit lacking." Tu Feng's tone didn't decrease in the slightest. Hellion Vivian moved her fingers and picked up the rest of the items. She turned them left and right and then smiled. Each has its own use. Such a complete set of exquisite equipment, as expected of the world-famous Battle Spirit Forces. With these things they could appear and disappear like ghosts and kill without a trace of blood. "Now can you tell me the information you know?" Tu Feng's gaze was very indifferent. Hellion Vivian put the items back. "Recently the Forest of Fantasy has been a bit chaotic. Someone has been ignoring the rules and secretly killing large amounts of people." Hearing this, Tu Feng furrowed his thick eyebrows. "Large amounts of people?" "That's right." Hellion Vivian paused and then added, "It seems that they want to use this method to extend their lives." Tu Feng looked at her. "Who are they?" Hellion Vivian thought for a moment and then said, "The elders of the 4 great families." Tu Feng's eyes suddenly narrowed. "Do you know what you're facing by saying this?" "Of course." Hellion Vivian smiled. Principal, you can investigate first. There won't be any losses. Tu Feng lowered his voice. There won't be any losses, but for the battle spirit forces it's a challenge. If we offend the 4 great families, it will be very disadvantageous for the battle spirit forces in the future. I thought the battle spirit forces would not be afraid of any power. Hellion Vivian lifted her chin slightly. Looking at her posture, Tu Feng's eyes suddenly darkened. He then took out a piece of paper and handed it to Hellion Vivian. This is the news we received last month. We don't know what happened in the Forest of Fantasy. Not only were the sacred beasts massacred in large numbers, those magical beasts that didn't come out of the Forest of Fantasy easily in the past have started to become restless and want to enter the city. A while ago we sent a few people to investigate this matter, but none of them returned. If the 4 great families are involved, it will indeed be a little tricky. Hellion Vivian flipped through the piece of paper. It recorded everything that had happened in the Forest of Fantasy recently. Speaking of which, when she met Little White had said that someone wanted to kill it. It was probably from then on that the Forest of Fantasy started to fall into chaos. But to be able to disguise this chaos as peace, how meticulous was the other party? Hellion Vivian closed the piece of paper. Looks like the principal believed my words from the beginning. This matter is not a small matter. Tu Feng's eyes widened. Once the news is leaked, it is very likely that it will cause even more negative effects. You are all new members. If you want to take over this matter, you should pass the test first. Hellion Vivian smiled. Then what does the principal think of the military seal in my hand? It's still the same old saying, wait until you pass the test first. Tu Feng looked at her and smiled gently. In less than a second, he returned to being the principal of the White Academy, who was as difficult to deal with as a fox. I suddenly thought of something. It's already past the bedtime in the academy, but you're still wandering outside so late at night. According to the academy's rules, when you pay the tuition fee next month, you have to pay an extra 10 taels. After saying that, Tu Feng walked out of the room. Hellion Vivian looked at Tu Feng's back as he walked away. She had a headache and held her forehead. I've never seen someone who loves money so much. Do you have the right to criticize others? Yuan Ming despised her. Hellion Vivian directly ignored him and looked down at the little one. Where's your equipment? This. The little one moved his palm and a black wooden stick appeared in his hand. Hellion Vivian took it and looked left and right. The attack power is 90%. Not bad. When we return to the courtyard, I'll adjust it for you. Okay. Other than food, the little 7th prince usually spoke very little. Hearing this, Tu Feng, who was about to leave, suddenly turned back. Alright, during the test you will compete in pairs. The winner will be rewarded. After the reward just now, Hellion Vivian did not have any special thoughts about the reward. Tu Feng naturally understood her meaning. His smile deepened. Every time you win the test you'll get 10,000 taels. When will the test start? Hellion Vivian immediately changed her attitude. This made the little 7th prince look at her with a heavy gaze. Hellion Vivian rubbed the little one's head. With the reward I can buy you meat. Meat? The little 7th prince looked up and seriously repeated Hellion Vivian's question. When will the test start? Tu Feng was very satisfied with the combat power of these 2 people. He softly said, any time. Then he paused and said, in addition to the 2 people you met today, there will be 2 more teams of foreign students. Don't embarrass our courtyard. The little 7th prince heard this and sneered. I'll beat them all up. How overbearing. Hellion Vivian felt that she could totally follow the little 7th prince in the future. There was no need for her to sign a contract with the royal family. Speaking of which, Yun Biluo was here. Wouldn't the royal family be disappointed if they could not find her? The night wind blew. In a corner of the inferior compound, Beligaju sat on the wooden chair, holding the long chain that was untied. He glanced at An Ing, who had woken up but did not say anything. However, the atmosphere around him was more oppressive than ever. His expression changed from the indifference when he first came in to colder and colder. In the beginning he thought that Hellion Vivian was taken away by someone. It wasn't until he saw that Shadow had lost his outer garment that his black eyes turned completely cold. Well, who could take her away? It was more likely that she ran away. Beligaju tightened his grip on the iron chain. Why did she always want to run away from him? Was it because of that Tang guy? Or did she think that he was no longer the clean desk mate she thought in her heart? She thought that he was vicious and his methods were dirty. So when she could not tolerate his methods, she could not tolerate Beligaju at the same time. His tolerance towards her and his repeated compromises towards her could not compare to the fact that Hellion Wei Wei did not care about him at all. It was really unforgivable. Beligaju covered his face with one hand. His 5 fingers tightly gripped the long chain in his palm. His body trembled slightly. Chapter 309. There were more than a dozen shadow guards standing quietly around him. The whole room fell into a deathly silence. This was the scene that Heizhu saw when she came to look for an Ing. She didn't know that Beligaju was also in White Academy. She only saw that the figure standing in the middle of the room was very similar to her master. She couldn't help but widen her eyes. Why is His Highness here? Has His Highness been staying in White Academy all this time? That's why he chose that ugly woman Hellion Vivian as his consort. It's just for convenience. Heizhu thought of this and her heart moved. It's good that His Highness is here. In this way she and her sister don't have to spend so much effort to get the little 7th prince into the palace. They just need to tell His Highness the news of her sister's return. Everything will be solved. That Hellion Vivian is definitely finished. Her tongue was cut by her. If it wasn't for her sister feeding her blood, she would have been crippled by now. That ugly woman Hellion Vivian, it's time to let her know what she is. Heizhu raised her mouth. She didn't know why His Highness looked a little different today, but she believed that as long as it's about her sister, His Highness will definitely deal with it first. Her sister has been with His Highness since childhood. After making up her mind, Heizhu jumped lightly and landed on the ground. When an Ing saw that it was her, he furrowed his thick eyebrows and reached out to grab her. Why are you here? Why didn't you tell me that His Highness is here? Heizhu's eyes were full of doubt. You don't want His Highness to know the news? I really didn't expect that even you would stand on that ugly woman's side. Have you ever thought about my sister's feelings? Shadow lowered his voice. I advise you to leave immediately. Heizhu looked at him funny. What kind of witchcraft does that ugly woman have? Even you were fooled by her, why should I leave? I must tell His Highness the news of my sister's return. Seeing that he couldn't stop her, Shadow watched helplessly as she walked towards Bailey Jiaju's direction. He could only feel helpless. Your Highness. Heizhu knelt down on one knee and said in a very reasonable manner, I don't know why Shadow and Princess Consort didn't tell you when they knew that my sister was back. Princess Consort is even more vicious. She ordered someone to cut off my tongue. I'm afraid she was worried that I would come to tell you about my sister's return after knowing that His Highness was in the White Academy. Beligaju gripped the iron lock in his hand and said in a low voice. Get lost. Heizhu didn't hear it clearly and thought that her voice was too soft. She paused and reached out to touch Beligaju's hand. Bang. Almost instantly, Heizhu was bounced to a corner by an invisible gas. There were dozens of wounds on his body, especially on his face. It was a mess of flesh and blood, leaving only the fear in his shaking eyes. Many of the shadow guards who were nearby were implicated, and they felt an intense pain in their internal organs. Bailey Jiaju had a smile that was not a smile as he casually threw away the iron lock in his hand. He slightly raised his head. That pair of deep and narrow eyes seemed to ignite with a faint light, just like a demon that had walked out of a manga. His entire body carried a demonic aura. Such a strange situation made the shadow guards couldn't help but show fear. However, Fire Qilin was excited. How long has it been since he saw his master like this? Thousands of years had passed. He almost forgot his master's original appearance. Now, Fire Qilin ran back and forth excitedly and said in a deep voice, Master, did you remember something? Beligaju ignored him and walked closer to Heizhu. He looked down at the person kneeling on the ground and said in a cold voice, Do you think anyone can touch me? With that, his long and narrow eyes narrowed slightly. Heizhu's whole body became extremely painful. How could this be? Blood overflowed from the corner of her eyes and her blood boiled. Heizhu was puzzled. Was it because His Highness was in a rage and couldn't hear what she said? Otherwise, why would he treat her like this? Heizhu reached out and pinched her throat. The last trace of blood gushed out from her throat. That kind of pain was as if it was corroding her bones and heart. Bailey Jiaju seemed to smile for a moment. It was both elegant and dangerous. His expression carried boundless bewitchment and danger. Who gave you the guts to talk about my woman? You all deserve to die. Bang. The last sound was. Heizhu's head completely tilted and no longer made a sound. The shadow guards trembled all over. They didn't understand what their master meant and didn't dare to look directly at Beligaju's eyes. They just stood there trembling. Beligaju turned around, his eyes like frost. Find her and bring her back. These 5 words were like ice flowers blooming from the North Pole. It was so cold that everyone couldn't help but feel numb. The night was so dark that it became as sticky as splashed ink. Hellion Vivian and the little 7th prince walked out of the underground palace together. She didn't know if it was because it was too dark, but the swaying of the branches seemed a little eerie. The little 7th prince wasn't afraid, but he was obviously a little sleepy. As he walked, his little head kept nodding. After nodding to a certain extent, he shook his little tiger head and looked straight ahead. Hellion Vivian's heart was about to melt. She bent down and picked up the little one. The little 7th prince was a little shy at first. After all, he remembered 3rd brother's words. A real man couldn't be carried by others. But he couldn't reject 3rd sister-in-law. Sigh, it was so difficult to be a man. The little one had a tiger face and nodded very seriously on Hellion Vivian's shoulder. His eyelids drooped and were about to cover his lively tiger eyes. Suddenly, he seemed to have heard something. His little body stood up and his eyes started to shine. Hellion Vivian frowned and didn't move immediately. The sound behind them was getting louder and louder. It sounded like countless long snakes were crawling. In the fog, the dark body that had almost blended into the night seemed to be enjoying the sweet scent in the air that it had not smelled for a long time. There was a kind of creature that would never let go once it made up its mind. The delicious taste was definitely worth the effort. It would just wait until there was no one else around and use the darkness to devour her. To it, the walls were nothing and it could move freely. When the demon-transforming beast reached a certain level, it was no longer limited to its body size. It could transform into any shape it willed. It was drooling and its legs were floating in the air. It was surrounded by a grayish-black mass of air. It looked at Hellion Vivian in front of it with satisfaction. It opened and closed its mouth slightly. Black balls of sticky liquid came out of its mouth and flew straight ahead. Chapter 310. All of a sudden, Hellion Vivian's palm emitted a dazzling light that gradually formed a black paper umbrella. The black fog was blocked by the black umbrella mercilessly like a fragile spider web. The demon-transforming beast's expression changed. Its body that was suspended in the air shook violently. The black fog was separated from its body. It was a part of its body. When the black fog was destroyed, it was as if a piece of its body was cut off. It was very harmful to it. Damn it! The demon-transforming beast cursed in a low voice and stared at the black umbrella that was emitting a strange light. Which bastard was messing with it? The demon-transforming beast reached out its hand angrily and wanted to destroy the golden lotus with its long and sharp fingernails. However, when the demon-transforming beast's fingernails touched the black umbrella, the demon-transforming beast was shocked and withdrew its hand. It widened its eyes and looked at the fingertips that it had always been proud of. But now, a large part of it was cut off by the person on the bed with a dagger. This was impossible. The weapons in the human world could not hurt it at all. Do you know what will happen to you if you disturb us at this time of night? Hellion Vivian glanced at the demon-transforming beast indifferently and looked back lazily. Behind her was Yuan Ming with his silver hair fluttering in the wind and a smile on his face. He was the messenger of the demon that was feared. The demon-transforming beast's expression changed abruptly. It was out of its wits and wanted to run away. Hellion Wei Wei sensed its intention and sneered. Carrying the little 7th prince in one hand, she opened the umbrella and moved her fingertips slightly. Amidst the piercing sound of the wind, countless fallen leaves bound the demon-transforming beast. Ah! The demon-transforming beast screamed. Its ugly body immediately turned into a wisp of green smoke and was sucked into Yuan Ming's stomach as nutrients. The little 7th prince stared with his tiger-like eyes. He thought that he would have a chance to fight. It seemed that 3rd sister-in-law did not need him at all. In the past, whenever they encountered evil beasts, 3rd brother would always let him take the lead while 3rd brother would follow behind him casually. Perhaps 3rd brother chose 3rd sister-in-law not only because she was a good cook, but also because she was good at fighting. Yes, 3rd brother really has good taste. Hellion Vivian did not know what the little one was thinking. She could not help but raise her eyebrows when she was stared at by the pair of piercing tiger eyes. What's wrong? I'm fine. The little seventh prince rubbed his chin and continued to stare. Obviously there was something going on. You want to eat meat? This was the only possibility that Hellion Vivian could think of. Little seventh prince explained to Hellion Vivian in a dignified manner. What I'm thinking now is that third brother probably chose you because he wants you to fight magical beasts for him. As for eating meat, that's something I have to think about all the time. Fighting demonic beasts. This was not an instance dungeon. All the time? Well, she was wrong. She shouldn't have used the thinking of an ordinary person to connect with a foodie. However, that thing just now, what was it? Hellion Vivian hugged the little one and her eyes darkened. She heard Yuan Ming whisper in her ear, "It's a phantom beast, a type of demonic beast." It's really strange. When did the Battle Spirit Forces test become so difficult? They released the phantom beast right after the test. Aren't they afraid that you will be swallowed by the phantom beast? Sometimes it will create all kinds of illusions. Once a person has an inner demon, it will be very difficult to escape. Fortunately, you discovered it in time. Otherwise, if you were pulled into the illusions, it would be a dead end. However, the phantom beast will not act on its own. There must be at least two of them. One is responsible for creating illusions and the other is responsible for eating people. Now it seems that there is only one left. Escaped? Hellion Vivian looked around. Yuan Ming nodded. It's very possible. The phantom beast is more cunning than any other demonic beast. Woman, it seems that you won't be peaceful for the next few days. The phantom beast is the most vengeful demonic beast. You killed their companion, they will not let it go. Then I'll wait for them to come again. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly. Her whole body was emitting an evil aura. The corner of Yuan Ming's mouth curled up. His eyes were filled with evil. You'd better ask the person in charge of the Battle Spirit Forces. A cold voice split the chaos. Hellion Vivian's eyes flashed with surprise. Her voice also became lazy. You're awake? Yes. The little white cat jumped out of the darkness. Its amber eyes were emitting the light of a king. After successfully passing the heavenly tribulation, its fur was more lustrous than before. Every strand of its hair seemed to be dyed with frost. It was incomparably noble. Little seventh prince looked at the little white cat that jumped out. He knew that it wasn't an ordinary cat. It should be of the same species as Little Green that he picked up. He stretched out his hand and didn't stand on ceremony. He pulled the little white cat's ear domineeringly and looked left and right. The little white cat's expression changed. Where did this brat come from? Yuan Ming laughed unkindly. That's why it's said that pets shouldn't come out blindly. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Why do you want me to ask the person in charge of the Battle Spirit Forces? Phantom beasts shouldn't stay in the academy. No one has the right to bring them out of the forest of Xuanhuan. Even if the Battle Spirit Forces want to do this, they have to go through many considerations. This is because phantom beasts are different from ordinary demonic beasts. They are absolutely dangerous demonic beasts. If they're not careful, they might cause trouble. Therefore, no one wants to bring them out of the forest of Xuanhuan, unless that person wants to cause chaos in the world. As the descendant of the White Fan clan, the prince of the Cat clan knew more about beasts than anyone else. But it was because of this that Hellion Vivian frowned. You're saying that this isn't a test by the Battle Spirit Forces? Not necessarily. Little White's voice was cold. I think there's a loophole in this. Hellion Vivian's eyes flickered. I know. Bang. A different sound came from the other side. Little White retracted her gaze. It should be a test by the other people. Ask them if they encountered phantom beasts like you. When Hellion Wei Wei lifted the little one up, she saw a few other people walking toward them. They seemed to have just gotten rid of the trouble they had caused. Some of them did not look good, but some of them did not show any change in their expressions. For example, Han Yu. For example, Yun Biluo. When this person was in the same group, she fully demonstrated the combat power that couldn't be expressed with words. Those who didn't perform well in the test were already tired. When they saw Hellion Vivian, they didn't say anything. They probably knew about her ability, so they weren't worried and walked over proudly. Hellion Vivian stood aside and raised her eyebrows. When it was Han Yu's turn, she pretended to hold his arm casually. Han Yu looked at her and said proudly, "What? Don't you know that men and women shouldn't touch each other?" Chapter 311. Don't worry. I won't have any thoughts about you just because of your face. Hellion Vivian smiled. Hanyu was furious. Tell me what's wrong with my face. You're as beautiful as a flower. Hellion Vivian sighed. Too beautiful. Hanyu's mouth twitched. He snorted. I'm good at both men and women. What do you know? Tell me, why are you looking for me? Why are you being so mysterious? What was the content of your test just now? Hellion Wei Wei lowered her voice a little. Hanyu glanced at her. A small whirlwind beast came. What? Yours wasn't a whirlwind beast? A small whirlwind beast? Hellion Wei Wei's eyes narrowed. Wasn't the difference in the standards of this test a bit too big? Maybe Xiaobai was right. There was a loophole in the test. But she didn't know how big the loophole was. Unless there was one in the battle spirit forces. Hellion Vivian clenched her fists. She didn't show it on her face. She smiled. Mine is the same. I'm just asking you out of concern. Concern? Hanyu laughed evilly. Then he reached out his arm and placed it on Hellion Wei Wei's shoulder. With a devilish smile he said, how can someone of your level be considered as caring? You're not sincere at all. The little seventh prince glanced at Hanyu's hand. Without wasting any time he threw a long rod over. Hanyu was so shocked that he dodged to the side. He turned around and looked at the little one who was full of vigor. Little seventh prince didn't say anything. He picked up the stick and started the second round of attack. Hanyu dodged and shouted, Little seventh, are you crazy? How dare you flirt with third aunt? You should be beheaded. The little one paused and raised the wooden stick that he had just taken out from the underground palace. Then with a flick of his finger, a huge net flew towards Hanyu and enveloped him. Hanyu didn't expect this move. He tripped and his big body was trapped in the net. Hey little seventh, let me go if you dare. Let's fight one-on-one without martial arts. I've already defeated you. Why should I fight you one-on-one? The little one looked down at him from above. Then he stepped on Hanyu's head and stomped on it twice. He muttered, how dare you flirt with third aunt? How dare you flirt with third aunt? Hanyu howled, my head. The overbearing little seventh prince completely ignored him and directly dragged him by his feet. Then he threw the other end of the net onto the tree branch. Then he jumped up, grabbed the net with all his strength and fell down again. Hanyu was hung upside down from the tree branch. Little seventh prince propped up a large rock with one hand and pulled the net rope to the top. He was done. Yun Biluo looked at the scene. No one knew what she was thinking, but one could vaguely see that her eyes were a little heavy. It seems that you all have already passed the first round of tests and you all seem to be getting along quite well. Tu Sufeng walked out from the place he had just disappeared from, and the corners of his mouth carried a faint smile. The corner of Hanyu's eyes twitched as he was hung upside down on the tree. How did you find out that we're getting along quite well? Little Seven is a violent person, he didn't even care. Tu Sufeng seemed to have seen through Hanyu's thoughts. He let out a long sigh and said, Little Seven, put Master Han down. As he spoke he looked at Hellion Vivian and the rest. You all can rest early today. Follow me, there's a shortcut in the underground passage. Hellion Vivian thought. Why didn't you say this earlier? Therefore all the new students followed Tu Sufeng into the bushes. Only Hanyu was dragged in by little seventh prince using the net rope. Little seventh prince's posture of dragging people was very domineering. He held a meat bun in one hand and an adult man in the other. The scene was so shocking that one did not know whether to laugh or cry. The underground passage was very long. If Tu Sufeng did not lead them, none of them could guarantee that they would not get lost. Hellion Vivian did not tell Tu Sufeng the content of the test just now because it was not suitable to talk about it in front of so many people. She was just thinking about something else. Miss Vivian and little seventh prince are really close. Yun Biluo walked up to them without them noticing. Her voice was soft and calm, but there was an indescribable smile in it. Hellion Vivian turned her face away. She did not say anything but just raised her lips with a lazy and mocking smile. Yun Biluo narrowed her eyes and laughed again. I wonder what Miss Vivian can teach me. I only know His Highness habits. I want to get close to little seventh prince but I don't know how to do it. After all, children are different from adults. Although they are all brothers, little seventh prince seems to like to eat more. Hellion Vivian never liked to deal with people like her who hid needles in their words. People like her usually had two meanings in their words. Just like now, Yun Biluo wanted to tell her how familiar she was with Beligaju. This kind of jealousy drama. She disdained to fight, but it did not mean that she would back down. How could she not return the favor when someone came to her door? Hellion Wei Wei curled her thin lips and looked at Yun Biluo meaningfully. Then she said casually, I'm his third sister-in-law, of course he'll be close to me. I guess Miss Yun can't do that, so I don't have any experience to impart to you. Yun Biluo was stunned. Yuan Ming, who was listening at the side, was somewhat gloating. I reckon that after hearing your words, her heart will be stifled for the entire day. Woman, you're too vicious. You clearly know that she is aiming for the position of third princess consort, yet you still clearly tell her that she can't do it. I am a gentle person, I can't always fight and kill. Why can't I talk nicely when I can solve the problem by talking nicely? Hellion Vivian adjusted her collar casually and continued to walk forward. Yun Biluo looked at the back of the figure, holding the handkerchief in her hand for a while before she started walking. However, in the next moment, a transparent stone wall suddenly appeared in front of Hellion Vivian, isolating them from Tu Su Feng completely. Hellion Vivian recalled what Tu Su Feng told them when they entered the underground palace. Your test will come at any time. Isn't that a little too timely? Is it really not decided by the dean's mood? Separated by the transparent stone wall, Hellion Vivian and Tu Su Feng looked at each other. Then they turned around and their first reaction was to carry the tiger-faced little one. Han Yu also realized that something was wrong, his brown eyes narrowed slightly. On the other side, two people were panicking. They pointed at the stone dragon head at the side. Look at this. Chapter 3:12. Looking across the row, there were more than 10 faucets with water flowing. The water flow was not rapid, but it was suffocating. Especially when they were surrounded by walls, once they came into contact with water, they would not be far from death. In just a blink of an eye, the water had already reached their calves. Normally, when the water flow was rapid, once it reached the waist, it would be 2 to 3 times more difficult for a human to breathe. When Hellion Vivian was on a mission, she was most worried about encountering such a situation. It would be fine if she was alone, but now she was carrying little bald head in her hand. It was not hard to imagine that this sudden test would not be easy to pass. Most importantly, none of them were prepared. They thought that since the first test had just ended, the second test would come a day later. No one would have thought that in less than the time for half an incense stick to burn, there would be a second test. Hellion Vivian knew that this was Tu Su Feng's way of testing their ability to react on the spot when their bodies were extremely tired and their minds were relaxed. However, she did not expect that Tu Su Feng would go all out with little Seven around. Go back. Yun Biluo reacted immediately. However, it was obviously too late. The amount of water from the dozens of faucets was far beyond their expectations. However, in the next moment, the water in the dark tunnel gushed up to their waist. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes and placed little Seven on a higher spot so that he would not be washed away by the water flow. Han Yu had just untied the net, and when he popped his head out, the water had already reached his neck. Everyone was swimming back crazily. When people were about to die, their first reaction was to register for the test. No one was an exception. Third Ant. The little one did not know how to swim. He frowned and struggled to ask Hellion Vivian, if there are fishes in the water, I can still live a little longer. Hellion Vivian was speechless. What did this have to do with the presence of fishes? She really did not understand foodies. You guys cough, hurry up and leave. Han Yu started to spit out bubbles as he spoke. Hellion Vivian did not speak anymore because the water had reached her eyes. At this moment, the most important thing for people was to maintain their strength. Logically speaking, this was actually a test. That meant that there must be a way out. But that method was definitely not going back. Because if they walked back, Hellion Vivian was not in the mood to think. She could feel that her brain was a little bloated. This was the basic reaction of a human being underwater. Gradually, nothing could be seen in the dark tunnel except for the water. The only thing worth rejoicing about was that the water was very clear, and there was another night pearl in the dark tunnel. However, to keep one's eyes open for an extended period of time was simply a form of torture. Little Seven didn't know how to swim, so she wasn't suited to stay underwater for long. Hellion Vivian gritted her teeth and tried to pull him back. But at this moment, the person who had already walked to the exit swam back. While underwater, he knocked on the wall with all his might as though he was trying to find an exit. Yun Biluo's situation was the best. She had raised all the martial qi in her body, and the martial chi was hovering around her, giving her a short time to catch her breath. When the others saw her like this, they also began to follow her example and began to increase the martial chi in their entire body. This method was indeed effective for the time being, but it had a sense of fatality. That was, after using this method, those who lacked martial chi would lose all their strength. Help! There was already a person who couldn't take it anymore. The faint light on his body began to fade and he desperately reached out his hand. Hellion Vivian didn't have the energy to care about the others. She only dragged the little one. She narrowed her eyes and focused her gaze on the only place that was different. That transparent stone wall. There was no time to look for any mechanism, so she might as well make her move. With my life I command the winds and clouds of the world. Hellion Vivian suddenly straightened her body in the water. She hugged little Seven with her left hand and slowly exerted force with her right hand. An invisible water current surged into her palm. No one noticed except for Yuan Ming. This woman had once again broken through his understanding of human beings. Bang! Along with the strong water current, Hellion Vivian punched the transparent stone wall. A cracking sound was heard. In an instant, layers of cracks appeared on the stone wall. Tusu Feng was still looking at her with a gentle smile, but the instructor behind Tusu Feng frowned heavily. Bang! She punched again. The stone wall shattered. Water gushed out. Tusu Feng took a big step back. The rest of the water quickly flowed out from the original underground drainage pipe. There were indeed mechanisms everywhere. Hellion Vivian's long black hair was wet. Her first reaction was not to question Tusu Feng, but to bend down to check little Seven's eyes. Then she pressed twice on his chest. Her action was very fast and professional. Even Tusu Feng revealed a slightly astonished expression. Just as the little one spat out 3 mouthfuls of water, the others came out one after another. Yun Biluo, on the other hand, was not as flustered as before. However, this sudden situation made her lose her composure as she was before. The other two were even more uncomfortable. After they came out, they kept coughing. Their eyes were red and they laid on the ground weakly. Even Han Yu was supporting himself with one leg, his handsome face showing fatigue. Congratulations, all of you are still alive. Tusu Feng walked over. Sometimes we have to face unexpected dangers. When you go out to carry out orders, no one can guarantee your safety. So, the first lesson of joining the battle spirit forces is to learn how to survive. As he spoke, he looked at Yun Biluo. Yun Biluo reacted quickly and thought of using martial chi as a defense. That's a good idea. However, I don't recommend everyone to use martial chi as support is too exhausting. Compared to that, I'd rather see everyone be observant. There's an escape button on your left-hand side. You should all go back. It's a waste of time to go back. Moreover, when you're killing the enemy, no one will give you any chance to turn back. Tusu Feng's gaze fell on Hellion Vivian. The reward this time is yours. There was no need for any explanation because it was Hellion Vivian who broke the wall. Han Yu recovered and came over curiously. Hey woman, how did you find out that there was something wrong with the wall? It's impossible to go back using the elimination method and reverse thinking. This is a test. If you were the one who came up with the questions, you would also seal the way in. There are always traps in the secret passage. Usually, the materials used to set up the traps are not that solid, so it's definitely easier to break through than other places, Hellion Vivian explained easily, but not everyone could react like that. Tusu Feng looked at her with admiration. The other instructor furrowed his brows even tighter. Chapter 313. How could a freshman who had just entered the academy know so many things? Besides, wasn't she the legendary trash in the capital? Although she won the first place in the martial chi competition, her reaction just now did not seem like a freshman who knew nothing. Of course, Tusu Feng was aware of this. He looked over and said with a gentle voice, "Don't worry, little Seven is fine." He knew what Hellion Vivian was worried about. Then he explained, "This child has been afraid of water since he was young." Aju saw this and went to the deep sea to get him a dragon pill. Dragon pill, the inner core of the divine dragon. Not only could it improve one's martial chi cultivation, it could also be used as a lifesaver underwater. As long as the person was fished out within a certain period of time, even if he drowned, his internal organs would not be damaged. He could still be alive and kicking as long as the water was discharged in time. However, looking at little Seven's listless face, one could tell how much he hated the bottom of the sea. He blew 2 bubbles in a row and said unhappily, There's no fish. How can there be fish in the secret passage? Tusufeng was having a headache again. Little Seven curled his lips and said to Hellion Vivian, "Dragon pill is not as delicious as dragon meat." "You've eaten dragon meat?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and bent down to brush away the little one's wet black hair. Little Seven nodded. At that time, third brother dragged a dragon back. "I ate it for many days. The meat was so delicious." Dragged a dragon back. Dragged a dragon back? A picture appeared in everyone's eyes. The cold and noble third prince with his long sleeves fluttering in the wind dragged a dragon from the deep sea and stepped onto the land. Behind him thousands of splashes rose up, but no one could do anything to him. As expected of His Highness, Yun Biluo smiled and turned to look into Hellion Vivian's eyes. Hellion Vivian didn't pay attention to her. She very handsomely brushed the black hair on her forehead to the back, revealing that melon seed-sized face. She was thinking that this matter was indeed in line with His Highness' way of doing things. Not only did he destroy someone's nest, he even arrogantly dragged them out of the sea and arrogantly dragged them all the way home. Even if he had a fire Qilin as a mount, he couldn't be so arrogant. How was he going to mingle in the deep sea realm in the future? He would definitely be hacked to death at any moment. When Han Yu heard about Beligaju, his first reaction was to scoff. Tusufeng glanced at the burning sandalwood beside his hand. "It'll be dawn soon. This time you can really go back and sleep. Of course, the test isn't over yet. I'm looking forward to your next performance." When everyone heard this, they finally heaved a sigh of relief. One by one, they dragged their tired bodies and walked towards their respective courtyards. "Dean." Hellion Wei waited until everyone had dispersed and left before calling out to Tusufeng. Tusufeng turned around with a smile on his face. "Why? Do you have any doubts?" Hellion Vivian held the little one's hand and walked over. "I want to ask about the first test. Did everyone challenge the whirlwind beast?" "Yes." Tusufeng's voice was gentle. "The test starts from easy to difficult. That way you can gradually get used to it." Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. "But little Seven and I didn't encounter the whirlwind beast just now. It was the demon-transforming beast." "Demon-transforming beast?" Tusufeng frowned. "This kind of demonic beast won't be used in the test. Even in the future we won't let you come into contact with this kind of demonic beast that isn't easy to control. There must be something wrong somewhere." Hellion Vivian smiled. "I also think that this kind of demonic beast shouldn't appear in the academy, especially in the test of the battle spirit forces." She made it clear. Someone as smart as Tusufeng understood what she meant. His eyes darkened. "I'll investigate this matter. There can't be any problems within the battle spirit forces." The night was getting lighter. When the sun rose from the east, one's mind would be muddled. In the jagged bushes, a demon-transforming beast leaned on the man's leg, trembling in fear. "Master, what happened? Did you fail the mission?" The man glanced at it and put the chess piece in his hand on the chessboard. "Master, you're so resourceful." The demon-transforming beast flattered and said carefully, "That woman is a little weird, but I can't tell why. But she killed my brother. I won't let her go easily." Swoosh. Before the demon-transforming beast could finish its sentence, it was stunned by a chess piece flying toward it. "Master, did I ask you to hurt her?" The man stood up and his black eyes were slowly dyed with light. The demon-transforming beast saw that he was staring at it coldly. That look was like a poisonous snake that wouldn't allow anyone to say another word. The demon-transforming beast was so scared that its face changed. Its black claws didn't even dare to move. In the boundless dark night, only the man's gem-like eyes could be seen. "Find all the demon-transforming beast. Since one or two of them have no effect on her, a group of them should have some effect. Soon the White Academy will let the students learn how to summon their own sacred beasts. We should make our move then. What about Miss Yun?" The demon-transforming beast stretched out its claws. The man quietly put the chess piece where it should be. "She has her own things to do. Also, tell her that she can get Beligaju, but don't ruin my plan." "Yes." The demon-transforming beast's black shadow fell on the ground. "But if we leave the forest of fantasy in large numbers, the battle spirit forces will soon notice the problem. By then the royal family will hunt us down." The man put the chess piece aside. "The royal family will be dealt with by the 4 influential families. What are you afraid of?" but the third prince of the royal family has Fire Qilin by his side. If it appears, none of us will be able to escape. Besides, the demon-transforming beast seemed to have recalled something and was very frightened. Master, have you forgotten that we were defeated by that person when you were young? That's why, Pa. The black chess piece was put down. The man raised his head. Under the moonlight, only his well-defined chin could be seen. Don't forget that I was not awake at that time. Besides, Yunbiluo can control him now. That's right. The demon-transforming beast's eyes lit up. Its black shadow fell. Master, you're right. I'm being too careful. I'll go and summon them all now. The man nodded. The silent darkness was like an invisible hand that quietly swallowed up everything. If you're right, we'll create an award next month and share it with everyone. What do you think? WeChat Red Packet. Chapter 3:14. In the dark tunnel, the water receded. Two Sufings stood at one side of the stone wall, and on his right side stood another teacher as well. Lao Bai, do you still think that she hasn't joined the battle spirit forces? Tu Sufing traced the broken stone wall with his finger. This stone wall can't be broken by just anyone. He has secrets that we don't know. The teacher named Lao Bai didn't change his expression, but laughed. This girl is a little out of my expectations. But the test has just begun, let's wait and see. What do you think? Tu Sufing lowered his eyes. You're right. The test has just begun, but we need to investigate the battle spirit forces internally. Internal investigation? Lao Bai frowned. Why? Tu Sufing retracted his gaze. Someone used our first test to release the demon-transforming beast into the academy, and I just received a piece of news. Lao Bai's expression changed when he heard the words demon-transforming beast. What news? Someone is killing a large number of sacred beasts. Tu Sufing looked up. This must be reported to the retired emperor. Lao Bai's thick eyebrows furrowed even tighter. Don't forget, the battle spirit forces can't get involved in the competition between the four great clans and the imperial family. This is a rule that has been set since the beginning. The reason why the battle spirit forces can exist for so long is because of their independence. Do you still remember what the old man said when he was alive? Tu Sufing glanced at him. The independence of the battle spirit forces comes from the fact that they are not affected by other forces. This matter should be dealt with accordingly. Then I don't understand why you want to tell the retired emperor and not the elders of the four families. With their cooperation, this matter should be handled better. Lao Bai's suggestion was very pertinent. However, Tu Sufeng had his own considerations. There are some things that I can't tell you now, but it's not appropriate to ask the four influential families for help this time. As he spoke, he paused and continued. Also, the hidden army's military seal is in Hellion Wei Wei's hands. What? This was what shocked Lao Bai the most. Almost everyone thought that the hidden army had disappeared with the defeat of the Hellion family. How did this military seal appear in Hellion Vivian's hands? Tu Sufeng's eyes were warm. Before the old man died, he said that the battle spirit forces, or the hidden army, would be able to lead the entire hidden army as long as the successor of the general manor passed the test. Ever since the old man passed away, the Hellion clan has fallen into a period of decline. We have always appeared in front of the world as the battle spirit army. Now that the military seal has appeared, the leaderless group of us can finally see the light of day again. Early in the morning, water droplets slid down the wide leaves. Qing Zhan stood in front of the door anxiously. She frowned as she looked at the sky that was getting brighter. She was usually very calm and didn't talk much. If she hadn't encountered something, she wouldn't have behaved like this. The main reason was that the Princess Consort had been missing since last night. In addition, His Highness had sent so many people to search the entire White Academy, but they still couldn't find the Princess Consort. According to His Highness's temperament, if he really found the Princess Consort, who knew how he would treat her? A gust of wind blew, rustling the branches. The green bamboo forest swayed with the wind. The sunlight shone on the sandalwood table and the red rose petals were like sweet blood. Every minute and every second was incomparably long. The man supported the table with one hand lazily, and the other hand played with the petals wantonly. His light-colored pupils emitted light and he smiled coldly. She hasn't come back yet? None of the shadows dared to speak. Just yesterday they were shocked by His Highness' anger to the point that their internal organs hurt. Beligaju held his chin elegantly. and the black tassels on his sleeve covered the mocking smile at the corner of his mouth. "Tell me, if you can't even find a person, why should I keep you?" "Your Highness." Shadow suddenly opened his mouth. He wasn't worried about himself. What he was worried about was that since last night, the ruthlessness in his master's nature seemed to have been completely ignited. Retired Emperor once said that His Highness could do anything, but he must be stopped before his eyes turned red from killing. Otherwise there would really be rivers of blood everywhere. "What?" The tone of Bailey Jiaju's voice was indifferent as he raised the teacup beside him and lightly shook it. The side of his devilishly pale face was indescribably charming and handsome. "Shadow, in the end your words can make me a little happier. Otherwise, get lost immediately." The last word, "get lost," was said very coldly. Shadow knew better than anyone how many Shadow Guard's master had crippled in this one night. Shadow knelt on one knee on the ground, his forehead full of cold sweat. According to Princess Consort's temperament, she wouldn't just leave like this. She still hasn't taken back the Hellion family. Moreover, when Princess Consort left, it seemed like she had something to do. It didn't seem like she had completely left. Moreover, if Princess Consort left, she would definitely go find He family's second young master. However, she didn't go to the fine compound. Bailey Jiaju listened with his face turned sideways. No one could tell whether he was happy or angry. He narrowed his eyes and said, "You're right. She has been planning to leave the palace for a long time. She wouldn't be in such a hurry." As Baligaju spoke, there was no expression on his face. His left hand that was placed on the sandalwood table couldn't help but clench into an iron fist. He carefully supported the red roses in front of him, raising an ice-cold aura. With a bang, that bright as fire, the bouquet that symbolized thick warmth, quietly lay in the corner. Baligaju got up, one hand in his pocket, and arrogantly looked down at that expanse of red. His chest faintly felt somewhat blocked. If she could escape once, she could escape a second time. Even if he found her this time. Her heart was filled with another person. Bang! A fist punched the sandalwood table. Baligaju took a deep breath and raised his arrogant head. His long black hair set off his perfect ice-cold face, and as usual he was elegant and bewitching. Nothing more than a prey. Better than her, prettier than her, more well-behaved than her. The noble third prince turned around and gradually disappeared behind the screen, faintly revealing a loneliness that made people unable to shift their gazes away. He took off his white outer robe as he walked, along with the white cloth wrapped around his hand, and casually threw it on the large bed. His eyes, as deep as the night, emitted a faint ice-cold aura, but also carried a loneliness that even he didn't understand. Fire Qilin was the person closest to him, so naturally, it could detect a little bit of his emotions. "Master, have you ever thought about it? Perhaps to you that woman isn't as simple as a prey?" Baligaju's eyes were cold. "If she isn't a prey, then what is? You didn't treat your prey like this before." Fire Qilin stroked its handsome fur while muttering. "For example, when he treated it a whole month of vegetable leaves, did he think that he was feeding a dog? Even if he was feeding a dog, he wouldn't eat it." Chapter 315. Baligaju wrinkled his long eyebrows. "I find that the older you get, the more long-winded you become. Fire Qilin, who is this for? Isn't it because its master has never been in a relationship before? Love. Truly a troublesome little demoness. However, there is one thing that you are right about. This time my methods are too gentle." As he spoke, Bailey Jiaju stood up from the wooden couch. The light in his eyes was slightly cold. His tall and slender figure was indescribably gentle like jade. However, that pair of eyes contained too much overbearingness. "No matter what it is, it's right to hold it in your hands first." "Yes." Fire Qilin respectfully bowed its head. Its fiery red beast form was faintly discernible behind Baligaju. The sun shone down. In the superior compound's attic, the little seventh prince slept on a wooden rope. In his arms was a big meat bun. That meant that when he was half asleep and bored he could take a bite or two. Hellion Vivian sat in front of the window and lazily stretched. She held her chin as she thought about something. Her body was very tired, but her mind was very clear. Her lower abdomen still hurt, especially after coming out of the water. She kept falling down. "Woman, your body isn't very good right now. I suggest that you stay by the third prince's side. Think about it, you still need at least, 3 times. That's right, 3 times. Yuan Ming devilishly hooked his lips. Little White transformed into the shape of a white cat and lazily paced on the ground. It was cold and arrogant. What, 3 times? Yuan Ming's smile deepened. Of course it's dual cultivation. Dual cultivation? Little White's face froze. Its brows tightly knitted as it looked at Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian waved her hand. When the time comes we will think of a way to solve it. There are still 16 days. Yuan Ming reminded her with a smile. Hellion Vivian unhurriedly nodded. That's why we need to solve everything in 16 days. As she spoke, she picked up the invitation that Tu Su Feng instructed someone to deliver. On it was clearly written that the 3rd test would be held in the academy. At that time, all of the new students would be in the center of the courtyard and begin to learn how to contract with their own spirit beast. At that time they would need to be prepared for the arrival of the test. He wondered what the content of the test would be. Hellion Vivian put away the invitation and looked at the color of the sky outside. It's about time. The students from the superior compound are also starting to head to the courtyard. Shall I go wake Xiaoqi up? We'll tidy up a bit and head to the courtyard. All right. Little White replied coldly. When she walked past Hellion Vivian she added, the matter with the battle spirit forces won't be resolved so quickly. When you're looking for spirit beasts keep an eye on them. If anything happens bite your finger and summon me. Hellion Vivian nodded and narrowed her eyes. It seemed that even Little White had felt it. The White Academy's sky was about to change. Rumble. A clap of thunder rang out. Large raindrops fell on the green stone tiles. The man held a folded umbrella and stood under the dim light as if he was waiting for someone. Yun Biluo, who was walking forward with the help of a maid, paused her steps and ordered the person beside her, "You go somewhere else first." "Yes, Miss Yun." The maid retreated quickly. Yun Biluo walked up and saw that there was no one around. Then she knelt on one knee. "Master." "Get up." The man turned around. His well-made long sleeves were slightly rolled up. His slender fingers held the folded umbrella and sized her up. "It seems that the cup on your body has been very obedient recently." Yun Biluo's body stiffened. "Yes. So you don't plan to do what I asked you to do seriously?" The man raised his head and looked at her. There was an evil aura at the corner of his mouth that did not match his face. "Do you think that you'll have nothing to worry about once you've established a relationship with the Murong family? Biluo, you're too naive." As he spoke, the man's pupils shrank. Yun Biluo curled into a ball in pain. The sweat on her forehead overflowed. "I didn't think so. It's just that it's too difficult to send a message to the palace now. The retired emperor is still there. That old thing has never liked me. If he knows that I'm still alive, he'll definitely kill me." "Seems that you really don't know." The man looked at her lightly. Yun Biluo calmed the pain. "Know what? Beligaju is in the White Academy." The man glanced at the noisy crowd nearby. Yun Biluo's face was filled with surprise. "He's here? Why didn't Heizhu tell me?" Of course, an ordinary death attendant wouldn't know. The man paused, his eyes gleaming. Besides, he won't tolerate a servant breaking the rules. "If your sister doesn't show up tonight, she's probably dead." As he spoke, the man looked at Yun Biluo. "Contact him directly. You know better than me what to do. Today, all the students from each courtyard will gather in the courtyard. You'll see him then." As he spoke, the man held up the umbrella again. He straightened his back and stood in a standard posture. His smile covered all the danger just now as he walked into the heavy rain. Yun Biluo suppressed the excitement from the bottom of her heart. Even her fingers were trembling. He was finally going to see him. "His Highness." Yun Biluo walked forward. She believed that as long as she explained what happened back then, His Highness would definitely forgive her. Of course, even if he didn't forgive her, it was still understandable. After all, if it wasn't for her, the fire wouldn't have started. It was very likely that he would ignore her because of what happened back then. All these were within Yun Biluo's expectations. She didn't care about any setbacks. But she was really frightened by His Highness at that time. It was as if he had seen the soul snatcher emissary from hell. His glowing eyes, coupled with the blood on his face, made him look a little inhuman. Her first reaction was to run away. But now she regretted it. She had been with His Highness for so many years. Her food and clothes were much better than the rest of the maids. He had never let her suffer, although he was still young at that time. But she didn't know what went wrong that made him realize that she was hostile to the other maids. He didn't do anything to her, so naturally he wouldn't do anything to her. Because everyone knew that the royal family doted on her the most back then. But he refused to let her touch him. This was the most unbearable thing for Yunbiluo. It was as if she had never walked close to him even though they were so close. So she started to feel unsatisfied. She was older than him and knew more than him. She was unwilling to wait for so many years and then watch him take a concubine. So when the 4 great families came to her, she agreed. She never thought that the medicine would contain the cultivation dissipation powder. She never thought of harming him. She just wanted him too much. Chapter 3:16. Yunbiluo calmed down her emotions and walked towards the center of the courtyard. All the students from the 4 courtyards were gathered in the center of the courtyard. This reminded Hellion Vivian of the time when she watched Harry Potter's movie, especially since they were going to contract the spirit beasts today. Every student was dressed in green and white robes, and they stood in their own courtyard in a square formation. The teachers stood at the front and explained in detail what to pay attention to. After all, even the spirit beasts would be aggressive if they were provoked. Hence, the beast taming technique became a big challenge at this time. Hellion Vivian sent little Seven to the superior compound's courtyard first. Yunbiluo saw her as soon as she arrived. She smiled faintly and took a step forward, looking at Hellion Vivian. Her voice was so soft that only the 2 of them could hear. "I heard that His Highness is in the White Academy." Hellion Vivian stopped absent-mindedly and looked up slowly. Her voice was calm, and then, "There's nothing else." Yunbiluo was very polite and even had a smile on her face. This was where she was better than Hellion Jiaoer. "I just want to know how much Miss Weiwei knows about His Highness." Hellion Vivian looked at her, her eyes were deep. At that moment, Yunbiluo thought that all her thoughts were seen through. It was a very bad feeling, just like when she was in front of the retired emperor. No matter how glamorous she was, the retired emperor only treated her as a servant girl and did not allow her to get close to His Highness. Yunbiluo lowered her eyes and continued, "He will treat anyone as his prey if he is interested in them. I think Qingzhan must have told Miss Weiwei about my past with His Highness. I don't know if I am right. I did something wrong in the past and His Highness could not let it go. Now that I am back, I don't want to hurt Miss Weiwei, but His Highness will always have his choice." After that, she made way for Hellion Vivian. She was so gentle, polite, and harmless. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and walked past her. Her lower abdomen was still hurting. She did not know what the test was about, but she was not in the mood to discuss these things with Yunbiluo. Furthermore, there was one thing that he had to admit. Baligaju did treat her like a prey. Woman, this Yunbiluo is not simple. Xiaobai narrowed his eyes. "I keep feeling that there's an indescribable aura on her. Be careful." Hellion Weiwei grunted and found a place to sit down. Yunbiluo looked at her from afar and smiled gently. In her heart she never thought that Hellion Vivian was a threat. Although His Highness married her, Heizhu also said that it was only to deal with the retired emperor. The other young ladies of the superior compound also thought this way. Therefore, when he saw the confrontation between Yunbiluo and Hellion Vivian, even though Hellion Vivian was now the 3rd princess consort, he or she was on Yunbiluo's side. No, to be more precise, they were on the Hellion Jiaoer side. When Hellion Jiaoer introduced Yunbiluo to them, she said that this person's identity was not ordinary. A person who could make Hellion Jiaoer treat her with respect might be a princess from some family. Compared to Hellion Vivian, the 3rd princess consort who could be kicked out at any time, of course, the words "not ordinary" were more useful to them. "Sister Yun, some people are like this. They don't like to talk to beautiful people when they're ugly. The most terrible thing about this person is jealousy. Sister Yun, you have to be more careful. Her identity is different from before. If she wants to scratch someone's face, the first person she will look for is Sister Yun. Sister Yun was brought in by the elders. She's not someone she can touch as she pleases. Sisters, let's not talk about that person anymore. We'll be summoning the spirit beasts later. Are you ready? Of course, but they won't be as powerful as those summoned by Sister Yun. Let's wait and see how Sister Yun will amaze everyone later." Yes, I think so too. The stronger one's martial chi is, the more powerful the spirit beasts they can summon. Those blast beasts bought in the market are no longer surprising. This time I really hope to see a divine beast like the fire Qilin. A divine beast like the fire Qilin? Impossible, the fire Qilin is an ancient divine beast. No one can summon an ancient divine beast. That's not necessarily true. Maybe Sister Yun can do it. Sister Yun is not only good at martial qi, but she can also practice martial arts. Besides, she has the experience of summoning a divine beast before. She's different from some people. Of course, they knew who the some people were referring to. Although they could no longer mock Hellion Vivian as they used to, they knew that even if she won the martial qi competition, she had never learned how to summon a divine beast since she was young. In addition, she did not have any martial qi flowing out of her body. The result was very likely to be the same as when she tapped on the crystal ball. There was no movement at all. Hellion Vivian naturally knew what they meant. Her thin lips curled into a smile. If those people looked closely, they would notice the mockery in it. She stood with her legs slightly crossed. Her posture was just like her, delicate and handsome from the inside out. When Jing Wushuang walked over, he saw this scene. Her figure was as gentle as jade. Naturally, those women could not continue being sarcastic. They quickly changed the topic and said that they were going to the temple to pray for peace for the people. Hellion Jiaoer's eyes turned red when she talked about where people were suffering. The daughter of the Liang family held her hand and looked distressed. Even Yun Biluo frowned slightly and sighed. It seemed that compared to them, Hellion Vivian was the evil person who had nothing to do with her. It was inevitable that it was funny. It was easy to save the people from the abyss of suffering. If they ate less bird's nest, they would have enough for an ordinary family's monthly living expenses. No one stipulated that one had to help the other. However, some people liked to do this, who did not like to say things that made them look kind-hearted. The main reason was that Jing Wushuang's charm was there for all to see. He was indeed the peerless young master. Just by standing there, he was like a flower and a Bodhi tree. He was so charming. Many women were blushing. He just walked over and smiled gently at Hellion Vivian. You didn't even attend the first class. The teacher called your name and said that he would teach you a lesson after seeing you. But where have you been? Why are you so late? Hellion Vivian was about to speak. A familiar cold voice came from behind. I also want to know where my sugar daddy went. The teacher thought that the student in front of him would strangle him to death in the next moment. Unexpectedly, Beligaju turned around and stood at his position according to the serial number. His eyes darkened as if he saw someone. Yun Biluo looked at Beligaju from afar through the crowd. She took a deep breath. Nothing could be rushed. Moreover, she could not ruin the master's plan. There was a bug in her body. Once she angered that man, she would only end up dead. Anyway, the master had said that as long as she could return to His Highness, he would remove the bug for her. She had to bear with it as long as she could kill two birds with one stone. Yun Biluo's eyes darkened and formed a circle with the people around her. On the other side, Beligaju and the little seventh prince formed a team from afar. The other people from the superior compound were always hostile to Beligaju, but they did not dare to provoke him. The little seventh prince was different. The little seventh prince was very excited. The way he expressed his excitement was very unique. His small body stood straight and his expression was very serious. When the people at the side saw this, their faces were filled with shock. One had to know that their little senior brother was not usually like this. The little seventh prince did not care about the others, not even the teacher's explanation. He moved to Beligaju's side with his two thick legs. He lowered his black hair and said in a voice that only the two of them could hear, "Third brother, do you have any jerky with you? I'm hungry." Beligaju's voice sounded colder than usual. The little seventh prince sensed danger and his eyebrows twitched. He was about to withdraw his short legs. "You go and change your sister-in-law to this team," Beligaju ordered in an indifferent voice. The little seventh prince looked at the team in the distance and then at his third brother's cold face. He bit his thumb and said, "Not this time." Beligaju raised his good-looking eyebrows. The little seventh prince put on a fierce face and whispered in Beligaju's ear, "The dean said that we have to follow the rules. Otherwise, the battle spirit forces will not give us the bonus. I'm in the same team with my third sister-in-law. I'm going to summon a big guy later." Battle spirit forces? Beligaju seemed to have thought of something. The coldness in his eyes faded a little. "You went to the battle spirit forces camp yesterday?" The little one nodded and told the story unhappily. "Yes, it was underground. I fell into the water, but there was not a single fish in the water. Fortunately, third sister-in-law saved me. Otherwise, I would have starved to death in the water. Shadow, it was indeed very cruel. But, shouldn't one drown first after falling into the water? After listening to his little brother's explanation, Beligaju's face did not change at all. It was as if it was a matter of course. This made the little one feel more and more that a place without fish could not be called water at all. Also, we encountered a very cunning demonic beast. The dean said it was a test. The little seventh prince narrowed his tiger eyes. That demonic beast came out from underground. At first it did not have a shape. It wanted to attack me and my third sister-in-law. My third sister-in-law killed one of them. The other one is now nowhere to be found. Fire Qilin heard this and suddenly said, "It's the demon-transforming beast. Master, someone must have entered the White Academy. It's not easy to summon these demonic beasts." Chapter 318. Demon-transforming beast. Beligaju narrowed his eyes. When he heard the name again, there was an obvious coldness in his eyes that was not there before. Of course, Fire Qilin knew what he was thinking. Demon-transforming beast was different from other evil beasts. This kind of evil beast had more complicated thoughts than human beings. It could create illusions and get into human bodies to control them. Back then, the Empress was controlled by demon-transforming beast. That was why Beligaju was treated so harshly. Of course, it was also related to the fact that the Empress disliked Beligaju since he was young. When she was pregnant with Beligaju, the Emperor started to be obsessed with women. She thought it was the child in her belly that delayed him. No matter how the people around her advised her to give birth to a prince so that she could have glory in the future, her resentment toward Beligaju did not subside. However, the Empress did not say that she did not want this child. She thought she could use this child to win the Emperor's heart back. However, what the Empress did not expect was that the Emperor did not change his mind. Instead, he spent more and more time with Murong. Therefore, the Empress did not take Beligaju seriously. She thought that giving birth to a prince was equivalent to not giving birth at all. In the future, no matter how outstanding Beligaju was, he was greatly discounted in her eyes. The Empress only had the Emperor in her heart. It was difficult for her to care about other people. It was the same even if that person was her own son. Therefore, this gave demon-transforming beast a chance to invade and control a person with inner demons. It was easier than controlling other people. That day, the Empress called Beligaju to the palace and called him a good-for-nothing. Then she pounced on him. Although its appearance and His Highness's sharp eyes scared the demon-transforming beast away, the damage was done. The Empress thought it was Beligaju who wanted to hurt her. The scissors fell and cut Beligaju's face. Blood was everywhere. Fire Qilin knew that it was not that its master could not dodge the scissors. It was because he thought it was the closest person to him. Because of this, the Empress feared him and sent him out of the palace. In less than a year, the Empress died. It was said that her body was too weak. Fire Qilin knew that its master had a bad childhood. However, the more the master was like this, the more it needed. Therefore, it had no opinion on what the Empress had done. But now, the demon-transforming beast appeared again. The Fire Qilin stretched out its claws and furrowed its eyebrows. Beligaju, on the other hand, was thinking about something else. His eyes turned cold as he ordered the person beside him, "Go and find out what the battle spirit forces has been up to recently." Shadow respectfully bowed his head and retreated. The headmaster stood in front and announced loudly, "The test begins." He didn't know if it was a small world or if it was just a coincidence. Hellion Vivian and Yun Bilyua were assigned to the same team. Amidst the continuous laughter, he had already intentionally or unintentionally started to glance in Wei Wei's direction. That kind of gaze was already very obvious. It was nothing more than a ridicule waiting to watch a good show. Qing Zhan saw this scene when she walked over quickly. She did not interrupt the headmaster who was teaching the method of summoning the sacred beast. But when she saw Yun Bilyuo's smile again, she swallowed all her words. She thought that Yun Bilyuo did not know that Beligaju was in the academy. She wanted to talk to Hellion Vivian after passing the test. Yun Bilyuo saw through her little hesitation. They were both death servants, so she knew better than Qing Zhan what this girl was thinking when she grew up. Perhaps in front of others, death servants would hide their emotions well. But Yun Bilyuo's advantage was that she could see through such concealment. Yun Bilyuo smiled, but her eyes darkened. Thinking about it, she had only left for a short while, But this girl's heart was completely biased towards an outsider. Heiju might not know that His Highness was in the White Academy, but as Hellion Vivian's personal maid, how could she not know where His Highness was? She just didn't want to tell her. Be it Qingzhan or Shadow. They were all the same. Yun Biluo turned her gaze and looked at Hellion Vivian. The headmaster had finished introducing the things that everyone should pay attention to. He said to Yun Biluo, "Biluo, give everyone a demonstration first." Yes. Yun Biluo stepped forward. Her beautiful face always gave people an indescribable sense of intimacy. She moved her fingers and a long sword appeared in her palm. The long sword was glowing. Coupled with her long sleeves that fluttered in the air, she looked like a fairy descending from the ninth heaven. Every move of hers attracted the attention of the headmaster and the students. Hellion Jiao watched this scene and the corners of her mouth curved upwards. She pretended to inadvertently brush past Hellion Wei, her voice carrying a thick sense of ridicule. You think that because you're married to the third prince you're truly free of worries. Open your eyes wide and look carefully. That's the person that the third prince likes. The third prince married you to deal with the retired emperor, and to use you as her substitute. But look at yourself, you don't have the looks and the only thing you know is martial arts. The third prince hasn't seen Miss Yun yet, but if he does, what do you think you are? You don't even deserve to carry her shoes. After she finished speaking, she wanted to see Hellion Vivian lose her wits. Unexpectedly, that person just sneered and looked back at her. Her thin lips slowly spat out a word, "Get lost." Hellion Jiao's face turned completely ugly. Her fingers made creaking sounds, and she looked at Hellion Vivian with a pair of poisonous eyes. Hellion Wei curved her thin lips, as if she was indifferent enough to infuriate someone to death. Let's see who will have the last laugh. Hellion Jiao waved her long sleeves and walked to the headmaster's side. Yun Biluo held the long sword with her fingers. She glanced at Hellion Vivian intentionally and said, "Wake up." A rumbling sound was heard. Something in the forest of fantasy at the back of the mountain seemed to be summoned, and there was a roaring sound. Just by the sound one could tell that it was a big guy. The onlookers looked at each other and looked at Yun Biluo with admiration. Even the headmaster stroked his long beard and nodded with satisfaction. Yun Biluo lifted her long sleeves and said, "Rise." The roaring sound became more and more obvious. It came from afar and approached. A pair of crimson wings flew up from the forest, then skimmed over the roof and stopped firmly in front of Yun Biluo. It's a double-winged beast. God, I haven't seen such a huge double-winged beast. Look, its whole body is on fire. It's amazing. The students were excited, but the headmaster stopped them all. You can go after it's tamed. It was not easy to tame such a huge double-winged beast. Chapter 319. However, Yun Biluo did not seem to care about this. She cut her finger as she waved her long sword. The blood splashed onto the double-winged beast's face. Then she said, "Keep." The crimson eyes of the double-winged beast gradually dimmed as if it was being controlled by someone. Its movements became gentler, but its eyes made people feel uncomfortable. However, the bystanders could not see this scene at all. Every student was excited to be able to summon such a huge double-winged beast. Seeing that the double-winged beast had quietened down, everyone ran over and surrounded the double-winged beast, looking left and right. It was their first time observing a spirit beast that was summoned directly from the forest of fantasy at such a close distance. They chatted excitedly. Yun Biluo retracted her hand and stood in front of the double-winged beast. She smiled gently at the crowd, looking very gentle and beautiful. Qingzhan's face turned pale in an instant. Not because of anything else. It was because His Highness was looking at them too. Hellion Jiao was happier than anyone else at this moment because she had not tasted the feeling of stepping on that little bitch for a long time. This was definitely a good opportunity. With a pair of sinister eyes, she was only thinking of letting the third prince know that Yun Biluo was back as soon as possible through this test. That way she could avoid the misfortune of marrying White and after this semester. Because by then Yun Biluo would definitely listen to their arrangement and help her to plead with the third prince. As long as she could get out of this, she could regroup and climb up again. He would not give up. Since young, she was much better than that little bitch. Why should she be the one to marry into the palace? Hellion Jiao narrowed her eyes. She would like to see how she, the third princess consort, would lose to a foreign freshman. Princess Consort. Qing Zhan retracted her gaze and held Hellion Vivian's hand worriedly. Her body was half tilted as if she wanted to block Beligaju's sight. Hellion Vivian glanced at her. Qing Zhan, even if you cover it like this, he will see it sooner or later if he wants to. It's useless, move away. Qing Zhan looked at Hellion Vivian's indifferent eyes. She lowered her arm and stood aside. She lowered her eyes and said, yes. Across the crowd, Yun Biluo finally met Beligaju's gaze. Looking at the man's slightly furrowed brows, she smiled. She knew that His Highness had never forgotten her. As expected, Yun Biluo lowered her eyes and there was more affection in them. Hellion Vivian watched this scene. The pain in his lower abdomen never stopped. But it didn't affect her expression. Come to think of it, other than the fact that Beligaju chose her because she was interesting, perhaps the rest was to make use of her. This was how it should be. People who approached her always had ulterior motives. In this world she was an orphan with no power or influence. What was the purpose of a prince marrying her? Just like this body, she used to like Murong Chongfeng so much. In order to attract his attention, she even went to the East House to ask for money from Madame Su. She also picked up Hellion Jiaoer's clothes to wear. Since everyone liked Hellion Jiaoer and he looked at Hellion Jiaoer with a gentle gaze, would he not hate her so much if she wore Hellion Jiaoer's clothes? Only she knew how much complaints and disdain she had to endure in order to wear the clothes she wore. She didn't have a mother and she didn't have a maid to order around. All her efforts were just to bring back the childhood Murong Chongfeng. However, every time she only got his disgust. And the laughter of those young masters and the sarcasm of those young ladies. What was Murong Chongfeng doing at that time? He was watching coldly from the sidelines. He would even be worse than those people and give her a hard time. Because she was no longer useful, because she was no longer the superior successor of the Hellion family, because she had no power behind her. Here, family background was very important. When Beligaju chose her, it was probably because of her tattered family background. He waited until this step when there was no other power involved and he could divorce her as he wished. If he married another young lady from a prestigious family, he would have to deal with so many trivial matters. It was undeniable that Beligaju had a good plan. But things weren't so long-winded. She had already said that if he needed, she could give up her position to the person in his heart at any time. What's more, the two of them had agreed to cooperate from the very beginning. She had been doing business for so many years, and there was nothing that she didn't follow the rules in. He really didn't understand her. Hellion Vivian retracted her gaze and saw Yun Biluo seemingly smiling at her. The rest were waiting to see how she was going to summon the spirit beasts. The last time she entered the Forest of Fantasy, she had the help of the royal family, otherwise she wouldn't have come out safely. This time it was different from the Forest of Fantasy. The spirit beasts that were summoned were generally more ferocious than those in the Forest of Fantasy. Most importantly, not everyone could summon the spirit beasts here. There were already a few people in the inferior compound who couldn't summon the spirit beasts, and even some of the people in the good compound with poor qualifications could only sigh. In comparison, the probability of Hellion Vivian summoning the spirit beast was very low. But the next one to be summoned was not Hellion Vivian. It was Jing Wushuang. He put one hand in front of his pale lips and coughed softly. Facing the admiring eyes, he smiled warmly at the teacher. Teacher, although my meridians are still there, I couldn't practice martial arts since I was young, let alone summon the spirit beasts. So I won't waste your time, let the next person start. Couldn't practice martial arts since you were young? The teacher looked at him, who had a dignified appearance and was knowledgeable, and shook his head regretfully. The dean did tell me about your situation, so you can only watch from the side. If you're too tired, just tell me. Jing Wushuang was always reserved. After this conversation, almost everyone knew that this jade-like handsome freshman was sick and had no offensive power. The male students breathed a sigh of relief. They were really worried that there would be another one like the two powerful bastards from the inferior compound. It seemed that the freshman this time was very ordinary except for his face. The male students nodded satisfactorily and turned back to continue summoning the spirit beasts. If that's the case, then the next student will summon directly, the teacher said calmly. The next student was Hellion Vivian. The Hellion Jiaoer couldn't wait to watch a good show. Hellion Wei Wei merely smiled, put on a blazing green fur robe, and strolled to the location of the main courtyard. Her steps were very steady, her posture was straight, her wide long sleeves fluttered in the wind, making her look like a queen walking in the darkness. The teacher could only stare blankly at the dragon's eyes. He felt that if it opened its mouth at this time he would be blown away by the huge airflow. What to do? He had never encountered such a situation. When the students were summoning the mythical beasts, they actually woke up the sleeping dragon god in the back mountain. How could this end? The great masters who taught at the White Academy all knew that there was a huge Meow Lake behind the mountain. It was so deep that the bottom could not be seen. Regardless of whether it was dry or dry all year round, it did not affect the growth of rare flowers and plants. It was all because there was a huge azure dragon lying in the lake. For so many years the azure dragon had been sleeping in the back mountain. Today, it woke up. To be more precise, it was awakened by the noise. The azure dragon looked at the humans who were as small as ants and then turned its head. Its eyes met with Hellion Vivian's eyes that did not show any resistance. The azure dragon's eyes narrowed slightly. Was it this little thing that woke it up? What was that behind her? A white cat, the descendant of Baize. And the other one? The azure dragon frowned. It was a demon. Now humans dared to fight demons? Interesting. However, didn't she know that it hated it when people disturbed its sleep? The huge azure dragon coldly retracted its gaze and was about to teach this human a lesson. Then he saw a small person running towards him from underneath his feet. The little man's bald head patted his claws and said confidently, "Such a big dragon, it must be delicious to eat." The azure dragon, everyone, oh no. Where did young Uncle Master go? The teacher was the first to react. He covered his face as if he was about to collapse. No dragon could tolerate it when it heard that someone wanted to eat it. Moreover, young Uncle Master, you naughty child. Of all things to eat, you just had to eat the dragon god. How did the dean teach you? It's okay to bully us usually, but this is the dragon god, the dragon god. How are you going to eat it? Braised? Steamed? Little Bald Head studied for a while before he realized that his invincible third brother was not standing beside him. The little person was a little confused, but this did not affect his pursuit of delicacies. He squatted down and poked the dragon claws with his fingers. His fierce little face was full of seriousness. How do I eat it? The teacher took a deep breath. He had no choice but to wave his sleeves. All students stepped back. The azure dragon would definitely be angry. Yun Biluo stood among the students and her eyes slowly widened. The Hellion Jiaoer pretended to be weak and took a deep breath. My eldest sister is used to being careless. This time she summoned something, but she got herself into big trouble. Upon hearing this, everyone's shock when they first saw the azure dragon was replaced by a faint disgust. Speaking of which, Hellion Vivian did not even know how to recite spells. She probably did not have the ability to tame the azure dragon. However, the little seventh prince was probably in danger. No one dared to touch the dragon god's claws. Chapter 321. However, at this moment, in a flash, Hellion Wei Wei carried the little seventh prince over. With a light tap of her toes, she retreated a few meters backward. Then she straightened her body and looked at the green dragon indifferently. The azure dragon had laughed coldly when it heard that someone wanted to eat it. It reached out its claws and wanted to crush the person. Now that it saw that someone had snatched its prey, its eyes revealed a murderous glint. However, as an ancient divine beast, it was naturally more polite than other spiritual beasts. Before killing someone, it had to be polite before resorting to force. Human. The azure dragon looked at Hellion Vivian and slowly opened its mouth. Let go of the little guy and I'll forgive you for waking me up. Otherwise, I'll crush both of you into meat patties. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and realized that the azure dragon was using consciousness to communicate. She narrowed her eyes and said, I'm very sorry for waking you up. You can see that our academy is conducting a summoning test. I don't know what happened, but I've summoned you. I can apologize for that, but I can't hand this little guy over to you. Human, you're very bold. However, the azure dragon waved its huge tail and laughed coldly. No one has ever dared to escape from my wrath. As it spoke, its huge claws descended. When it landed on the ground, the entire academy seemed to shake. The students were thrown into disarray by this attack. Some fell while others dropped their belongings. Hellion Vivian quickly dodged with the little guy in her arms. When the azure dragon raised its claws, It glanced at the ground again. With a scornful look, it stomped down again. Hellion Vivian thought that she would be able to escape this time as well. She did not expect that the Azure Dragon's claws would carry such a strong murderous aura. Even though Hellion Wei Wei managed to avoid being trampled by the claws, her internal organs were also shaken by the baleful aura. Her whole body also followed and fell downwards. The Azure Dragon thought that she was definitely going to die this time. It was about to follow up with a second stomp. Swoosh. Hellion Vivian quickly got up. She held the umbrella with her fingers and flew into the air. Then she swooped down and put the little guy down. Then she turned around beautifully. Her left hand grabbed the iron chain that was imprisoning the Azure Dragon. Roar. A dragon's roar. Everyone covered their ears. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Even the wind and clouds were churning. However, Hellion Wei Wei stood upright in the middle of the whirlpool, her hand still gripping that long iron chain, without the slightest intention of letting go. The Azure Dragon turned its head to the side, wanting to get rid of her, but unknowingly she was already riding on its body. Hey Boss Dragon, do you want to get rid of this iron chain? Hellion Wei Wei sat on the dragon's back with bloodstains at the corner of her mouth, but her expression was more excited than ever. If you want, I can help you undo it, but there is one condition. You must obey my orders. The Azure Dragon coldly snorted. Human, are you dreaming? Do you know what this iron chain is made of? It's made of the ultimate black ice iron. It's engraved with the seal of an ancient god. Can you undo it? The seal only works on beasts. I'm not a beast. Hellion Vivian's thin lips curled up. Also, this iron chain is not that difficult to undo. Any cold weapon has its button. You just need to find it. The Azure Dragon was silent for a while. A long time ago I swore that I would only be loyal to one person. Although that person has disappeared, I'm still waiting for him. So I can't obey your orders. That's easy. Hellion Vivian wiped the back of her hand. We don't need to sign a contract. You only need to help me 3 times. After that, I'll let you go and find your master. You're trapped here. Even if your master shows up, you won't know. Why don't you cooperate with me? The Azure Dragon narrowed his eyes and tossed about in the clouds. Can you really undo the mysterious ice iron chain? Yes. Hellion Wei Wei lowered her eyes and looked at the iron chain in her palm. However, it will take some time. Boss Long, please don't move for now. I will be responsible for whoever you trample to death underground. After all, I was the one who summoned you. The Azure Dragon replied with a deep voice, but it was a little strange that a human could summon it. However, it didn't think too much about it, because the black ice iron chain on its body had trapped it for too long. 1,000 years ago, the palace fell and its master disappeared. It wanted to find the humans and ask for an explanation. So it roamed the world and burned countless villages and cities. It angered the god of tribulation and locked it at the bottom of the Green Dragon Lake for 1,000 years. For 1,000 years, its initial anger gradually turned into disappointment. In the end, it became dead calm. It began to accept the fact that its master was gone and lost all interest in the world. In the end, it fell asleep at the bottom of the lake. It had forgotten what sunlight tasted like. If it wasn't for this girl, it would still be muddle-headed, holding on to the hope of dying, waiting for its master. Now it could finally get rid of the iron chain. No matter how introverted the Azure Dragon was, Hellion Vivian knew how much it wanted to get out of the cage from the light in its eyes. Hellion Vivian didn't waste any time. She followed the iron chain and descended quickly. Her purpose was to find the source of the iron chain. The students didn't know what was going on. They only saw the Azure Dragon's big mouth moving and thought that it had swallowed Hellion Vivian whole and was now chewing her bones. Hellion Jiaoer laughed sinisterly. She didn't expect that bitch to dig her own grave in the end. How satisfying. However, Yun Biluo didn't think that it was that simple. The blood serpent beast that was supposed to respond to her lost connection at this moment. How could this be? Yun Biluo looked up in confusion and saw Hellion Vivian climbing down the iron chain. She didn't die. She was going to unlock the iron chain. Once the iron chain was unlocked, the dragon god would recognize her as its master. She had to stop her. Yun Biluo's eyes flashed. She lowered her arm and black blood flowed to the ground. He seemed to be chanting a spell. Bang! The creatures below were getting more and more restless. As if it was enlightened, its blood-red eyes suddenly shook. It wanted to get up again, but it was blocked by a figure in black with long hair. That person was very handsome. He had a cold and noble figure. He was wearing a long robe that reached his knees, but there wasn't a single speck of dust on his body. There was a faint smile on his lips. However, the magical snake beast felt a deep fear in its body. It was an oppression that came from the depths of its blood. It locked its throat tightly and froze its body subconsciously. Who is this person? Chapter 322. As for the blood snake's reaction, the fire Qilin didn't think much of it. Its respected master was always elegant and lofty, and he didn't make a move easily. But as long as he made a move, a simple raise of his eyebrows was enough to make all beasts tremble. However, the other party didn't seem to understand this. They even showed off their disgusting, sharp, poisonous fangs. The fire Qilin had never liked snakes. These cold and gloomy beasts were its natural enemy. The blood snake didn't see the fire Qilin because Beligaju hadn't released it yet. The blood serpent gradually recovered from its shock and started hissing. Its eyes, which symbolized evil and greed, narrowed into slits. It was ready to bite the neck of the man in front of it at any moment. Beligaju held the wings of the night god with one hand and said coldly, "Were you the one who emitted the disgusting smell?" Drip. Another drop of black blood fell on the snake's head. "It's me. Haha, I didn't expect a human to be able to detect my presence. But it doesn't matter because you're going to die soon." As it spoke, the blood snake's pupils constricted and it pounced toward Bailey Jiaju. However, Bailey Jiaju just stood there and didn't even move. The fox fur cloak draped over his body didn't have the slightest trace of blemish. Every strand of lustrous fur was blown by the wind and not the slightest bit messed up. The blood snake opened its mouth, but before it could bite down, it was flung a few meters away by Lu Xian's hand. "Stupid," he said coldly. As the man approached, the blood snake felt an unprecedented sense of danger. It shook its gigantic head twice, then slyly swung its tail, stirring up countless dust and gravel. Beligaju narrowed his eyes and walked in the middle of the gravel. His fingers were wrapped in black gloves and hung casually by his sides. "Tisk tisk tisk. You don't understand." Amidst the pervading dust, Bailey Jiaju's pair of eyes revealed a faint cold light. The smile at the corner of his mouth became evil and bloodthirsty. When the blood snake saw this, it ran even faster. After all, it had never seen a human walk out of the flying rubble. Beligaju opened his mouth and bit off the glove on his hand. On his wrist there were black tattoos that looked like vines. That familiar brand caused the blood snake's expression to change completely. It no longer cared about anything else and charged into the sky. Hellion Vivian was still holding on to the long chain, leaning forward to climb down. She didn't expect that a 7-foot-long python would suddenly jump out from behind her. After seeing her, it was as if he had seen some fresh food. It opened its bloody mouth wide and wanted to swallow her whole. She had no time to care about it and was about to dodge. Then he heard the sound of splashing water. It was unknown whose martial chi was so strong that it had a concrete shape. It was like a tall mirror wall that slapped the giant python onto the surface of the river. After a burst of silver light, the giant python that had been baring its fangs and brandishing its claws suddenly lost all of its hostility. Like a stray dog, it only had the remnants of its breath left. Its mouth moved as if it was calling someone. However, it didn't get a response. Hellion Vivian was stunned. Before she could figure out what had happened, she saw a man holding the wings of death with one hand. He was dressed in a noble robe and his waist-length hair was like splashed ink in the night. Green Dragon Lake was covered in a rain of blood. After the silver light, she couldn't see Beligaju's actions clearly. The giant python's mournful wail reached the sky. In the blink of an eye, the giant python fell from the surface of the lake to the ground, shaking the White Academy for a while. Separated by clouds and mist, the students of the White Academy didn't know what had happened. Beligaju sheathed his sword. There wasn't a single drop of blood on his body. He just looked down at Hellion Vivian with an indifferent expression. They had never seen such an arrogant person who saved people. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Her understanding of His Highness rose to another level. The appearance of the blood snake made the students who didn't know anything suck in a breath of cold air. How could such an evil creature appear in the academy? Who was the one who summoned it? What method did they use? The teacher looked at the giant snake head with lingering fear. Layers of cold sweat overflowed from his forehead. If it hadn't been killed by someone who knew how many students it would have swallowed in one breath if it had continued to stir up trouble. Furthermore, its body was highly poisonous and its favorite food was human blood. Such a ferocious beast wouldn't be allowed to appear outside of the forest of fantasy. Where exactly did this go wrong? The teacher raised his head with trembling fingers and looked up again. He saw that the green dragon was drowsy and seemed to be asleep. Even its eyes were half closed. He thought that the dragon god was so angry that it couldn't vent its anger even if it swallowed people. He didn't want to go back. He would live in the White Academy in the future. He suddenly felt stifled. However, he didn't know that the green dragon was cooperating with Hellion Vivian. It let itself fall into a state of light sleep first. Otherwise, when the mysterious ice lock was unlocked, it would definitely touch the dragon's scales. If it was awake, the dragon's scales would turn into fire and hurt Hellion Vivian. At this moment, Yunbiluo pressed on her left shoulder and took a step back. No one saw that when the giant snake fell, she spat out a mouthful of black blood. She leaned against the tree trunk as if she couldn't hold on any longer. Her eyes were shining as she looked into the depths of the clouds. No one knew what was happening under the layers of fog. Little Bald Head stood up and pondered for a while. He looked majestic and asked the evil beast with him, "Was it third brother who did that?" "Master, it was the royal family." The little one who was only a little bigger than Little Bald Head came over and answered the question seriously. Then he disappeared in front of everyone. The little seventh prince calmly said, "Then there's nothing to worry about. Third brother must be with third sister-in-law. That snake is not bad. Clean it up and roast it tonight." Yes. The little one was already familiar with his master's routine. It was just a blood snake beast. It even ate a dragon, let alone a snake. Clean it up immediately. Anyway, it didn't like snakes. It was better to have one less snake. In the chaos, Jing Wushuang stood in the middle. Dressed in green and white, he looked like a warm jade. He put his hand on his lips and coughed heavily. He was wiping something with his thumb. In the end, he just turned sideways and fixed his eyes on the green dragon. Hellion Jiaoer noticed his gaze and the jealousy in her heart grew stronger. She was just an ugly woman with dark skin. How could she make Master Wushuang value her so much? However, it didn't matter what tricks she played. Once she was swallowed by the dragon god, she would be digested in less than half an hour. She was waiting for the dragon god to spit out the little bitch's bones. Chapter 324. That's right, that's right. Now that the dragon god is out, the whole White Academy will be drowned if this continues. People were talking one after another. Yunbiluo shook her head gently, her voice was hoarse. This kind of situation is inevitable as long as there are no casualties. In the end, she still believed that Hellion Vivian was unable to tame the dragon god. This was because Yunbiluo did not know that Hellion Vivian had already unlocked the mysterious ice iron chain. Otherwise, why would the green dragon not submit to her? Therefore, Yunbiluo's first reaction was that Hellion Vivian was interrupted by the blood serpent demon when she was unlocking the chains, resulting in the current situation. The Hellion Jiaoer stood beside Yunbiluo and asked, "What about Sister Yun's injury?" Yunbiluo lowered her eyes and looked at the little one tenderly. She shook her head gently as if she was saying that as long as the seventh prince was fine, she would do anything. In comparison, the Hellion Vivian who got into trouble was superfluous. This made the little bald head very upset. He didn't say another word and ferociously kicked Hellion Jiaoer. The strength of that kick was extremely strong. It made the Hellion Jiaoer kneel on the ground in an instant. "Who do you think you are? How dare you talk bad about my third sister-in-law?" Everyone in the White Academy knew that although their little senior brother looked cute usually, he was very fierce. Once he was angry, he would talk with his fists. There was no room for discussion. Hellion Jiaoer was kicked into a daze. Following that, a pair of beautiful eyes brimmed with tears. That appearance appeared to be extremely aggrieved. "Seventh Prince, did you misunderstand what I just said?" What misunderstanding?" The little one sneered. At such a young age, he had a presence that was hard to ignore. "The one who saved me was third sister-in-law. When the dragon came out just now, none of you dared to come over. If it wasn't for third sister-in-law, I would have been killed by its claws. What does it have to do with this woman?" As he spoke, the little one pointed at Yunbiluo. Yunbilua was extremely tired, as if she was thinking for the little one. I'm just worried that Miss Weiwei won't be able to control the green dragon and will hurt the seventh prince. Unable to control it? Hellion Vivian smiled faintly. She covered her lower abdomen with one hand and slowly opened her other hand, as if she was preparing something. Her thin lips slightly opened, bringing out a burst of evil charm. Azure Dragon, come back. It was just a few words, but it made Yunbiluo's face lose all color. That was because the Azure Dragon flying above the clouds had landed behind Hellion Vivian at a speed visible to the naked eye. That arrogant and cold expression made everyone open their mouths wide in disbelief. God, the dragon god really listened to Hellion Vivian. The teacher could not be any more foolish. He had heard countless versions of the legend of the dragon god when he was still a student in the academy. Later on, he became a teacher in the academy and had a thorough understanding of the dragon god. He would never submit to humans. Even the eminent monks who came looking for it could not subdue it. But today, it actually listened to the command of a little girl. The teacher hurriedly pushed up the glasses hanging on his face, wanting to take a closer look. Hellion Weiwei stood calmly in front of the green dragon. Her green robe fluttered in the wind. Behind her, the clouds rose endlessly, faintly discernible. From that moment on, no one dared to laugh at her. Summoning the dragon god. Such a shocking move was something that would not happen even once in 1,000 years. Hellion Vivian, how did this person do it? She broke through their understanding again and again. Genius. She was a real genius, wasn't she? The students from the fine compound and the inferior compound were all amazed. Those from the superior compound were always unconvinced. At this moment they could not wait to find a hole to bury themselves in. Originally, they thought that with Yunbiluo's participation, Hellion Vivian would definitely be defeated. This was because they were unhappy with the person who became the princess consort in the end. She was someone who did not have the looks and talent. Moreover, Yunbiluo was indeed very powerful. Not only because of her background but also because of her own ability. She was better than Hellion Vivian in every aspect. However, they did not expect Hellion Vivian to be able to summon and tame the dragon god. Such an outcome was like a direct slap to their faces. Weiwei raised her eyes and slowly swept her gaze over those few aristocratic young ladies who liked to form cliques and cliques. In the end, her gaze fell on Hellion Jiao'er's body. She lifted her foot and stepped on her hand. The evil aura at the corners of her mouth was still as before. Younger sister, do you have anything else to say? Hellion Jiao'er was in so much pain that she wrinkled her eyebrows. She had never been in such a difficult situation before. Hellion Weiwei looked at her calmly and said in an indifferent tone, "A concubine's daughter without any title dares to speak disrespectfully to the princess consort. Younger sister, who gave you the courage to do so?" With this sentence, the ladies from the aristocratic families who wanted to speak up for Hellion Jiao'er shut their mouths abruptly. They did not expect that one day they would be suppressed by someone using their status. However, as long as Hellion Vivian said this, they could forget about moving. If they moved, they would be openly challenging the emperor's authority. The few of them glanced at each other and all of them shrank back. However, Weiwei didn't intend to let them off. The light in her eyes turned cold, her smile contained a murderous aura. "And you guys, who gave you the guts to ignore the academy's rules and bully whoever you want? What I hate the most is school violence. Several people ganging up to bully one person. You guys are really shameless." Hellion Vivian. Before that person could finish speaking. Then Hellion Weiwei gave him a tight slap. That person was not convinced and wanted to speak again. The Azure Dragon narrowed her eyes with an ominous glint. It made the ladies from the aristocratic families, who were used to running amok, completely weak in the legs. Good hit. There were already people from the good compound who were cheering. White Academy said that it was fair. However, there was no such thing as absolute fairness. Although this place was better than the capital. However, they did not dare to provoke those from the superior compound. Under normal circumstances, they would try their best to listen to them. However, as long as those people did not see eye to eye, they would immediately isolate that person. They even secretly pushed the students from other academies here and there, just because they thought that the other party was not obedient enough. Under such circumstances, the teacher should have stopped them. After all, those who were beaten were from powerful families and could not be provoked. However, when these students cheered, he did not know how to deal with them. Yunbiluo looked at this scene and felt that her face was slapped. Full of grievances, she bit her thin lips and looked at Beligaju. Chapter 325. Hellion Vivian naturally knew what Yunbiluo wanted to do. She just wanted Bailey Jiaju to make the decision for her. Hellion Vivian smiled gently. Today, no matter who it was, as long as they spoke up for this group of people, even if it was Beligaju, she would still fight back. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian raised her head and met Beligaju's indifferent gaze. Her heart tightened a little, but she was smiling. Especially at times like this, she could not back down. When Hellion Vivian was very young, she did a good deed. She picked up a phone and returned it, but she was locked up in the police station in Chinatown as a thief. She was later released. However, the mistress that her father married kept harping on this matter and refused to let it go. She would bring this matter up from time to time, saying that she just wanted to steal. Hellion Vivian tolerated it at that time. She would never forget what kind of feeling it was. Her heart was so empty that it was terrifying. She was injured but still punished. Because at that time she was so insignificant that she had no right to speak. Now she had worked so hard for so long just so that she could one day fight against these forces. Third Prince. Let's see if he dares to speak up for Yunbiluo. She would fight with him directly, even if he had Fire Qilin behind him and was once her desk mate. No one could bully her. Hellion Weiwei watched as Bailey Jiaju walked towards her. Her fingers clenched tightly as the corners of her mouth curved into a smile. Her whole body began to emit martial qi, but when she saw the wound on his arm, the sharpness gradually faded. Beligaju also seemed to be angry. The coldness surging from his eyes was thicker than ever. He must have seen his sweetheart being bullied and felt indignant. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes and smiled, but her expression was calmer than ever. Her thoughts were also very clear. She thought for a while and decided that it was better not to fight. Her chances of winning were too slim. Because he was still holding the wings of the night god that she gave him. Of all the things she had made, the wings of the night god was the one with the least flaws and the strongest attack power. One day Hellion Vivian knew that she had to make an enemy out of this man. She should have given Yuan Ming to him and then turned him gay. Hellion Vivian felt a bit of heartache for her martial arts. However, to be honest, Beligaju treated her differently. When she entered the academy, everyone looked down on her. Only the armaments that he thought she could make could be used. He was a little like young Master Tang back then. Hellion Vivian didn't say anything, but she still felt grateful. Plus, he had saved her so many times. Just directly terminate the contract. After Hellion Vivian made up her mind, she spoke in a voice that only the two of them could hear. Last time I said that since someone is back I can give up my position. Back then we agreed to advance and retreat together. But now it seems that won't be possible. Since that's the case, why don't we part on good terms? Beligaju's footsteps suddenly stopped. He smiled coldly. Part on good terms? Hellion Vivian made a sound of agreement. Suddenly, a loud noise came from underground. Hellion Vivian thought that something else would come out. Looking carefully, she found that the loud noise came from the man in front of her. The ground cracked open from under his feet, and the crack was so deep that she couldn't see the bottom. And he just stood there with a smile that wasn't a smile. One hand was in his pocket and the other was hanging by his side. Apart from the curve of his thin lips, even his eyes couldn't be seen. Everything was covered by his black hair. His smile was very light and very elegant. It seemed to match his usual indifferent attitude. It was just that the fingers hidden under the black gloves were a little white. The surrounding black fog suddenly thickened by a layer. A loud crash sounded. Countless bats flew up from the dense forest. It was like a sign of zombies coming back to life. It was a little scary. Hellion Vivian only heard the wind whistling in her ears. The surrounding trees swayed crazily and even the ground seemed to be shaking. Beligaju didn't seem to notice this. His Adam's apple moved back and forth twice. He was so cold and distant that almost no one dared to approach him. In this world, there were very few people or things that could cause his emotions to fluctuate. But today she made him a little angry. He had always tolerated her. He had raised so many prey, but he had never been so patient with any prey. But she had always wanted to leave. If it was in the past, such prey would definitely be abandoned by him. But damn it, his heart actually softened. How ridiculous! Beligaju curved his thin lips. No, he wasn't soft-hearted. How could he be soft-hearted? But why did his chest feel so empty? It was like there was a hole that couldn't be found. He hadn't hunted for so long that he even forgot the rules of hunting. How could a hunter be controlled by a prey? Ha! Beligaju laughed in a low voice. A demonic red light appeared in his eyes. A cool breeze blew quietly. He was still standing at the same spot. His posture was elegant, his back was straight, and his head was never lowered. His fingers with black gloves moved slightly. Violent winds and torrential rain swept over. Gradually the wetness stained his body. Yunbiluo saw this and paused. She took the umbrella from the maid and wanted to go over. Before she could get close to Beligaju, she was pinned to the spot by the man's cold gaze. That gaze was very similar to the time when he massacred the palace. Yunbiluo's heart trembled. She bit her thin lips hard as if she had made up her mind. She called out softly, "Your Highness." Except for Hellion Vivian, no one heard what Yunbiluo said. After all, the wind and rain were too loud, which blocked the hearing. Moreover, Yunbiluo's voice was soft. She lowered her eyes and said in a low voice, "I know you still blame me for what happened back then. Miss Weiwei." As she spoke, Yunbiluo glanced at Hellion Vivian. She wanted to say something but stopped. Hellion Vivian looked indifferent. Especially when her lower abdomen was still hurting, she wanted to solve the matter quickly. Therefore, she didn't want to pay attention to Yunbiluo's usual tricks. No matter what she said, she would let Beligaju handle it. Yunbiluo didn't expect Hellion Vivian to be so calm. But it didn't matter. What she wanted to do was to explain what happened back then and get His Highness forgiveness. Thinking of this, Yunbiluo took another step forward. However, before she could speak, she was smashed to the ground by a cold word. He said, "Get lost." Who was he talking about? Hellion Vivian? The corners of Yunbiluo's lips curled up. Sure enough, no matter when, she treated him differently. Chapter 326. Hellion Vivian's indifferent lips curved into an arc. She wanted to leave but found that her body seemed to be fixed in place. She could only look at the man beside her in confusion. What was the meaning of this? Didn't he ask her to get lost? Yunbiluo, on the other hand, was full of smiles. Her beautiful eyes were filled with unconcealable pride. Hellion Vivian looked at her indifferently with obvious sarcasm in her eyes. Why was she so happy? Yunbiluo was stunned by her gaze. She shifted her gaze and looked at Beligaju. She smiled faintly, looking intoxicated and gentle. However, Beligaju frowned slightly. His deep and sharp eyes glanced at Yunbiluo in front of him. He thought for a while and opened his mouth again. His voice was deep and very pleasant. "Miss Yun." His tone was very indifferent, but it faintly revealed an aura that made people feel treacherous. "Miss Yun." Yunbiluo was stunned by this title. However, she immediately thought that His Highness probably did not want to reveal his identity. That was why he called her that. Her smile deepened. The one who said to get lost is you." It was just a few short words. His voice wasn't loud, but everyone heard it clearly in an instant. Yunbiluo was stunned. She only felt that her brain was buzzing and she had a terrible headache. There was no emotion in that voice, as if she was just an insignificant stranger. After a while, Yunbiluo came back to her senses. She glanced at Beligaju subconsciously. However, Beligaju just stood there with an indifferent expression. Hellion Vivian, who was beside him, did not react in time. Yunbiluo clenched her hands awkwardly. Her clear and beautiful face was unnatural. Her sparkling beautiful eyes were filled with forbearance. She tried her best to squeeze out a smile on her stiff face. Her eyes were a little red and wet. "I know it's my fault." Yunbiluo obviously had something to say. However, the people beside them did not know what they were talking about. Coincidentally, after Hellion Jiao Air saw the man appear by Wei Wei's side, a scheme emerged in her mind. At this time she couldn't bear it anymore and opened her mouth in a loud voice. "Eldest sister, you keep saying that you're the princess consort to suppress us, yet you use the title of princess consort to be so intimate with another man. Eldest sister, aren't you afraid that others will say you're not chaste and unclean?" When Yunbiluo heard this, she could not wait to turn around and slap Hellion Jiao. Did she know what she was doing? She was simply ruining her plan. However, Hellion Weiwei did not give her the chance. She glanced at Bailey Jiaju with interest and said in a light tone, "Am I unchaste?" "Big sister, Everyone in the academy knows about what happened between you and this young master. Helian Jiaoer felt that if she did not show her trump card, she would completely lose the chance to defeat Helian Vivian. She decided to be ruthless. This young master's money was given by you, right? You two are not related to each other, why are you so nice to him? She would like to see what this bitch could say this time. Helian Jiaoer's purpose was obvious. A few ladies who were bullied by the side laughed. Princess Consort, you're really unworthy of the title of Princess Consort. A good academy has been messed up by some people. They don't even know how to behave in their private lives. I wonder how they passed the selection. That's why I say it's a good trick. Helian Vivian crossed her arms in front of her chest. She glanced at them indifferently and did not speak. Big sister, I want to believe you. Helian Jiaoer spoke very affectionately and earnestly. But the things you've done, everyone has seen it. His Highness doesn't know. If he knew, have you ever thought about the consequences? Little seventh prince furrowed his thick eyebrows. He looked at his third brother's indifferent face and then looked at the non-stop Helian Jiaoer. Only a few words appeared in his mind. This woman is dead for sure. As expected, Beligaju slowly opened his mouth. His low and deep voice was very magnetic. I don't know what the consequences will be. A face as handsome as a god paired with a devilish smile was reflected in Helian Jiaoer's eyes. Even Helian Jiaoer couldn't help but become absent-minded. This young master, I understand your difficulties. If you really lack money, my defense division will also help you. But you need to know that the one you're on good terms with is a married woman. Bailey Jiaju's smiling yet not smiling face carried an extremely unfathomable mystery. So it turns out that the young ladies of the defense division's large families have always used money to send people off. Faintly sensing that something wasn't quite right, Helian Jiaoer's tone of voice also followed suit and restrained itself. I'm only afraid that you'll be led astray. If young master thinks this way, then there's absolutely no need to continue discussing. I only hope that young master won't regret the words he said now. After all, our defense division also has dignity. Using your status to suppress me? Beligaju's thin lips curled up. Then he glanced at the little person not far away. The little person walked over with the snake's head. He raised his head. Third brother. His voice was a little soft. But it was like a thunderbolt that rang in the Helian Jiaoer's head. Her face turned pale in an instant. As little seventh prince called out third brother, all the students in the courtyard seemed to have their throats pinched by someone's hand. They looked at Beligaju in disbelief. Even the headmaster trembled in fear when he heard the title. A student from the inferior compound. An outsider who couldn't even afford the tuition fees. He was actually the famous third prince, the world's #1 prince? What was going on? The teacher felt a little dizzy. Some of the students felt as if their blood was boiling. Especially the students from the inferior compound, they were even more excited. No wonder their Prince Charming was so powerful. No wonder he didn't like to make friends and shocked the whole White Academy when he made a move. It turned out that their Prince Charming was not someone else, but the third prince whom they had worshipped for a long time. The group of students from the superior compound were dumbfounded. Thinking of how they had repeatedly wanted to teach him a lesson, they were so scared that they broke out in cold sweat. They even wrote him a challenge letter. Fortunately, this person had never put them in his eyes. So he didn't even bother to read their challenge letter. Or else. The more the students from the superior compound thought, the paler their faces became. Especially those young ladies, they were all in a mess. Almost all of them had laughed at the man's background because they were jealous that he was always with Helian Vivian. He didn't even pay attention to them. But now they only wanted to give themselves 2 slaps. Helian Jiaoer was anxious and wanted to explain. Her white and beautiful face showed urgency. Third, Royal, Chapter 327. You want to use your identity to oppress me, I heard it very clearly. Beligaju's cold tone carried an irresistible aura. Besides, who are you calling unchaste? When the man said this, he raised his long and narrow eyes with a chill. This made Helian Jiaoer's entire body stiffen. She had never seen Third Prince's appearance after he grew up. When she was in the palace, she only saw his back and was doomed eternally. Now she finally saw his real face. Helian Jiaoer did not even dare to look at him. She kept glancing at Yunbiluo, who was standing beside her, hoping that she would plead for her. Mother said that if it was Yunbiluo who said it, the royal would definitely listen. Helian Jiaoer, who thought that she held the death exemption card, did not know that Beligaju had just asked Yunbiluo to get lost. Murong Chongfeng, who came from afar, saw this scene and the corner of his mouth faintly curled up. Although this sudden revelation of his identity caught him off guard, he was still a little unprepared. But this way it was not completely without benefits. Father arranged for Yunbiluo to enter the White Academy so that she could meet Beligaju earlier. He thought that if he sent the news to the palace, the retired emperor might find out soon. Now he did not have to worry. Who would have thought that Beligaju was in the White Academy? This was for the best. Could also make Helian Weiwei realize that to that man she was just a chess piece that could be thrown away at any time. I'm asking you a question, why do you keep looking at others? Beligaju's voice sounded again. Helian Jiaoer braced herself and said, I didn't understand the situation and misunderstood Big Sister. I just thought that Your Highness and Sister Yun must have something to talk about after not seeing each other for so many years. Didn't Big Sister tell Your Highness about Sister Yun's return? Big Sister has seen Sister Yun several times. Helian Jiaoer thought that if she changed the topic she would be able to escape this disaster. Beligaju did not let her down. He glanced at the shadow guard with a faint smile. For some reason the shadow guard felt a chill down his spine when he saw that glance. Beligaju seemed to be absent-minded as he asked Helian Vivian, Have you met before? Yes. Helian Vivian felt that there was no need to hide this, but she could not figure out what Beligaju was thinking. Helian Jiaoer looked at this scene, the light in her eyes turned slightly and she added, It's probably because eldest sister felt that if His Highness knew that Sister Yun had returned, he would be distracted, so she didn't tell His Highness. Otherwise she wouldn't have competed with Sister Yun in the tea house last time. Beligaju turned his face and revealed an evil smile. You even competed with her. It seems like she came to the White Academy a long time ago. Sister Yun did come a long time ago. Helian Jiaoer felt that the earlier she said it, the more scheming Helian Vivian seemed. Yunbiluo listened to their conversation and was more certain that His Highness asked her to leave because he was still brooding over the past. In fact, he was very concerned about when she came back. Otherwise he would not have said so much to Helian Jiaoer. Yunbiluo could not help but feel wronged when she thought about what happened just now. She looked at Beligaju with tears in her eyes. Everyone said that the royal family was the most patient with Yunbiluo, especially when she cried. However, no one had verified it. In fact, Beligaju's eyes were gradually showing a thin layer of hostility. His slender fingers played with the pinky ring on his palm and he said in a low voice, No one informed me that you've been here for so long. I missed the opportunity to listen to your song. Yunbiluo heard this and her face softened. She smiled through her tears. Now that I'm back I can play it for you anytime. Really? Beligaju looked up and smiled suddenly. He was indescribably cold. If that's the case then play it now. Both of you play it together. If you play it well and the princess likes it I can pretend that nothing happened today. What? Helian Jiaoer did not expect Beligaju to say that. The smile on her face froze again. Yunbiluo's face was completely drained of blood. Your Highness. Helian Jiaoer seemed to want to say something. What's wrong? Beligaju walked over and looked at her coldly. You don't agree? Then I'll add 1,000,000 taels of gold as long as the princess is satisfied. He still had that unique smile on his face. It was so cold that it made one's scalp numb. There was a commotion among the students. They looked at Helian Jiaoer and Yunbiluo as if they were looking at performers in the dark alleys. That was exactly what the third prince was trying to say. Yunbiluo's fingers that were holding the handkerchief tightened silently. Her pale face seemed to have exhausted all her strength. She looked at Beligaju pitifully and murmured, I know your highness won't forgive me so easily, but it seems that you didn't hear my words clearly. Beligaju's tone was indifferent and even a little ruthless. Are you going to play or not? Upon hearing that, Yunbiluo's face turned even paler. Others might not know about Beligaju's tricks, but she had been by his side for so many years. How could she not know that he had 100 ways to make people wish they were dead? No matter how holy and noble he looked on the surface, he was colder than anyone else in his bones. Since you don't want to play, then forget it. Bailey Jiaju's voice was neither fast nor slow, but also seemed to carry a smile. The defense division's marriage should also be arranged. As for the other people who said anything bad about the princess consort, properly slapped their own mouths. As he spoke, he unbuttoned his collar with an evil smile. There was a murderous intent at the corner of his eyes. He tilted his body slightly. Or would you prefer me to do it myself? Who dared to ask the third prince to do it himself? Just this one sentence was enough to make everyone's face turn pale. Those ladies from aristocratic families did not dare to do it anymore. They could only reach out their hands and slap their faces, because they knew very well that if they did not do as they were told, it was very likely that she would end up in the same state as Hellion Jiao, marrying a eunuch. That was simply more painful than death. Wasn't it said that the royal family was marrying Hellion Vivian just to appease the retired emperor? But now it seemed that, how could there be such a reason? They only felt that they had been cheated. They regretted it so much that their intestines turned green. However, there was no medicine for regret in this world. So they could only clench their teeth and slap their own mouths. Your Highness, listen to me. Hellion Jiao was even more flustered. She wanted to grab Beligaju's sleeve. However, Bailey Jiaju did not even look at her. He turned to the little seventh prince and instructed, send her back to the general's residence. Just say that I said so. The general's residence has delayed the wedding. Are they trying to defy the imperial edict? Chapter 328. Upon hearing that, Hellion Jiao was completely paralyzed on the ground. She had never thought that it would end up like this. Her mother's guesses were all wrong. His Highness would not be influenced by anyone. Even if Yun Biluo was here, it would still be the same. Murong Chongfeng could not react in time as well. It was as if he could see their long-term plan collapsing all of a sudden. Both his father and his aunt had underestimated Beligaju. Yun Biluo had no choice but to bite her thin lips and look at Shadow, who was standing aside. Shadow did not dare to speak at this time. But even if he did not speak, Beligaju did not intend to let him go easily. He reached out his hand and patted his face gently. His devilish face was extremely handsome. Shadow, how many years have you been with me? I gave you the task and you fooled me like this. What did I say? You have to tell me immediately if anyone goes to the princess. Why is it an exception this time? It seems that I did not use the right means. Upon hearing that, Shadow's face turned extremely pale. Your Highness, please listen to me. I didn't know that Miss Yun went to the princess. Then what do you know? All of a sudden, Bailey Jiaju grabbed his throat. That kind of strength and coldness shocked all the Shadow guards. Shadow was in great pain, but he knew that this time he thought too highly of himself. Your Highness, it's my fault. Fido. Bailey Jiaju retracted his hand and said in an indifferent tone, I'll give you one last chance to settle this matter properly. Otherwise, everyone will stay underground and never come out again in this lifetime. As soon as the words left his mouth, not only the Shadow guards, but also the faces of those death attendants changed. One after another, they lowered their heads and no longer dared to show any disrespect to Wei Wei. However, at this time, Yun Biluo saw Beligaju walking past her indifferently and suddenly panicked. Your Highness, if you don't want me to disturb Miss Wei Wei, I won't bother her in the future. If I knew that knowing her would make you so unhappy, I would never do it. As Yun Biluo spoke, she reached out and grabbed Bailey Jiaju's sleeves in a panic. Her beautiful eyes could not help but sparkle, revealing a touch of vulnerability and grievance that could not be concealed. Beligaju stopped and looked up at her. He said indifferently, then disappear completely. Don't play tricks in front of me. Upon hearing this, Yun Biluo's face turned even paler. Although she spoke in such a light tone, she could not withstand the icy glare he gave her. She explained in a daze, I just want to see. However, Bailey Jiaju didn't have the intention to talk to her again. His tall and handsome body directly walked past her. Yun Biluo's aggrieved and choked voice was heard. Her pale and fragile face made one feel pity for her. Hellion Vivian could not move, but she could still hear. She raised her eyebrows and looked at Beligaju, who was walking toward her. She did not say much because her lower abdomen was hurting too much. It was so painful that she only had one question from the beginning. Was the royal family doing this to help her vent her anger? It should be. However, it was the first time she heard him say so much. Her words were even more hurtful than her actions. At least she did not have the ability to make people cry. But wasn't Yun Biluo the person he loved the most? Hatred born from love? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows again. Shadow. Baligaju walked to Hellion Vivian. He looked at her but ordered the people around him, "Take care of the aftermath. I have something to discuss with the princess." Hellion Vivian was speechless. Discuss what? You had the guts to part peacefully with me, but now you don't have the guts to look at me? The man's voice rang in her ears. Hellion Vivian thought that she could not move because she was immobilized by the body-fixing spell. Chapter 329. Hellion Vivian glanced at her left hand that was held by him. "If my reason is good, will you unlock it? You really have the idea of leaving me." Bailey Jiaju's slightly narrowed eyes suddenly sank. The depths of his eyes congealed with deepness. Looking at him made Wei Wei feel somewhat faintly uneasy. She couldn't help but look away. "Look at me, tell me, what are you thinking?" There was a hint of suppressed displeasure in his low voice, and the big hand around her waist tightened. That kind of strength made Hellion Vivian feel a slight pain in her waist. She could not help but frown, but her tone was indifferent. "I do have such thoughts. I don't know if you signed the contract purely to appease the retired emperor or to push me out to be Yun Biluo's shield. If it's the former, I can understand. But if it's the latter, I have to consider my own future and give myself a way out." "You're not a shield." Baligaju lowered his head and looked into her dark eyes. There were some complicated emotions, but he did not hide it. "You're a prey that I'm very interested in." Hellion Vivian rubbed her lower abdomen with a headache. "Yes, I know. He locked her up for no reason. If she was not a prey, then what was she? Moreover, from the way he treated her from the beginning, it was obvious that he was hunting, and he would use any means necessary." "Does my prey need to be someone's shield?" Baligaju's voice was very slow. That kind of noble demeanor made Hellion Vivian speechless. However, at that moment Hellion Vivian caught some information. Her eyes were fixed on Baligaju. "Your Highness, how many prey have you had?" Baligaju felt that she was simply changing the topic. When he answered, his long eyebrows were knitted together. Hellion Vivian's dark eyes were complicated. "One is me? The other is Fire Qilin?" "Yes." Baligaju raised his thin lips with a faint smile. "Do you want me to punish you immediately by talking about this?" Hellion Vivian continued to look at him, until Baligaju pursed his thin lips into a straight line. She asked again, "What about Yun Biluo? Why don't you treat her as your prey?" "Do you think anyone can be this lord's prey?" Baligaju was very unhappy that she kept talking about this kind of unimportant issue. Even his tone was a little cold. After Hellion Wei Wei heard the other party's words, she was suddenly somewhat stunned. She thought of many scenarios. But he didn't expect it to be this kind of person. Apart from the Fire Qilin, there was only her. "Baligaju, have you never liked anyone before?" Hellion Vivian dragged her tired body and asked another question. Baligaju opened his mouth with a hint of mockery. "Oh, no wonder your EQ is so low." Hellion Vivian let out a long sigh. She always felt that she had vaguely touched on some unknown secret. It was very possible. His Highness treated her a little differently, although it was narcissistic to think so. But she could only understand it this way. Hellion Vivian had been involved in a case before. The serial killer had such a mentality. He would treat whoever he liked as his prey. Of course, she didn't mean that Baligaju had the tendency to be a serial killer. No, thinking about it carefully, he did have it. In short, Hellion Vivian didn't know why her face suddenly felt a little hot. She cleared her throat and said, "Others said that you treated Yun Biluo differently since you were young. Why didn't you just treat her as your prey?" "She was a maid left by my mother." After saying a few words, Baligaju said casually, "And I didn't like to keep prey when I was young. I only liked to kill." Hellion Vivian. "Your Highness, how did you grow up?" When Bailey Jiaju saw that Hellion Wei Wei did not speak, he thought that she was being disdainful of his actions. His smile became even colder. "What's the matter? Are you uncomfortable after hearing all this?" "No." After Hellion Wei Wei answered Bailey Jiaju's question, she instinctively thought of young Master Tang. No one would be willing to learn how to kill at a young age unless it was absolutely necessary. After thinking for a while, she added, "I know what kind of place the palace is. You're just trying to protect yourself." Baligaju was stunned. Not because of anything else, but because the woman patted his head while talking. So he thought that the prey was so interesting. So interesting that he didn't want to let go. Hellion Vivian also felt that her way of comforting people was too cool and not suitable for His Highness. But anyway, she had already moved, so she couldn't take back her hand. It was just that her stomach was too painful and her face was a little pale. Actually, I'm a little uncomfortable. Where do you feel uncomfortable? Bailey Jiaju moved his fingers. Hellion Vivian directly stopped him. You don't have to unlock me, but I have to say that my robe is stained by my period. Even if he didn't understand the suffering of the world, Baligaju still knew what period was. He frowned and stood up from the soft couch. Hellion Vivian didn't know where he went, but he didn't unlock her robe before he left. She was too lazy to torment him. Especially after she guessed Baligaju's thoughts. She always felt that tormenting him would be a waste of her physical strength. Although she wanted to tell Baligaju that she was a person, a different kind of existence from the Fire Qilin. But even if she said it, His Highness wouldn't understand. It was more practical to sleep. Hellion Vivian turned sideways and pressed her lower abdomen with both hands. She was not very comfortable. Cold sweat overflowed from her forehead, making her feel like she was floating. She knew that Qingzhan came in to change her robe. After that, she heard the noise outside from time to time. She always wanted to ask them to be quiet, but she was too lazy to speak. Let them do whatever they want. Of course, Baligaju wouldn't do it casually. He directly called the imperial physician from the palace. The imperial physician had been practicing medicine for many years, but it was the first time he was called in because of this. He was too embarrassed to check Hellion Vivian's pulse. He only said to Baligaju timidly, Your Highness, when a woman is having her period, she will feel uncomfortable when she is exposed to cold air. She's in pain. Baligaju coldly interrupted the imperial physician. The imperial physician's scalp was numb from his long and narrow eyes. He reached out and wiped his forehead. This will indeed cause a woman to suffer more. Is there any way to solve this? Baligaju's long eyebrows were tighter, bringing out a strong sense of oppression. The imperial physician thought for a while. Boil some ginger sugar water for this lady. Maybe she will feel better. Maybe. It was obvious that Baligaju was not satisfied with such an answer. Give her some prescription that will cure her immediately. Prescription that will cure her immediately? The imperial physician was in a dilemma. Your Highness, there is really no way to cure this kind of pain. There was no record of any medicine that could cure menstrual cramps immediately. Chapter 330. Baligaju looked at the imperial physician who was standing next to him without moving. In the end, he only threw 2 words at him. Quack. Quack, quack. He had been practicing medicine for more than 10 years. When he was by the Emperor Emeritus' side, he had won a lot of prestige. Now he was being called a quack because of menstrual cramps. The imperial physician felt very wronged and began to look up at the ceiling with tears streaming down his face. Baligaju lowered his eyes and no one knew what he was thinking. In the end, he frowned and began to order the imperial physician, You, go and buy some ginger. The imperial physician exclaimed in surprise. Baligaju raised his eyebrows. Don't you want to drink ginger sugar water? The imperial physician was irritated by the way he looked at him as if he was looking at an idiot. Since he thought that he was a quack, why did he still use his method? Although he was shouting, the imperial physician still bought what he needed to buy. He resigned himself to his fate and boiled the sugar water. Baligaju sat next to the soft bed and seemed to have thought of something. He threw the outer garment he wore today to Aning. Burn it. Yes. Now Aning did not dare to ask why, even if this outer garment was newly made today and the fabric was the most expensive silk from Suzhou. Since His Highness found it dirty, he could only take it and burn it. Hellion Vivian was still sleeping. Her slightly wet black hair hid her small face. She looked like a trapped little beast. Even her claws were soft. Baligaju originally thought that he would like to see her like this. After all, this was the only way she could be peaceful. Now he felt that it was an eyesore. His fingers held her wrist and softly drooped down. For some reason he felt that it was not pleasing to the eye. When the imperial physician arrived, he saw this scene and was hesitating whether to bring the sugar water over. Bailey Jiaju opened his mouth. His clear and cold voice carried his usual command. Put the bowl there. Yes. The imperial physician knew that at this time he would not be tactful if he stayed. After putting the bowl down, he lowered his head and walked out. Baligaju picked up the porcelain bowl. Without thinking, he drank a mouthful of the sweet water. Then he leaned over and pressed his thin lips against her pale lips, passing the sweet water to her. Qingzhan was still serving by the side. When she saw this scene, her hands and feet stiffened as she retreated. Hellion Vivian was in a daze, but she felt very comfortable with the strength of the big hands on her waist. Coupled with the familiar smell of sandalwood around her, she fell into a deeper sleep. Beligaju hugged Hellion Vivian in his arms. His long legs were slightly crossed and his robe was scattered. That posture looked very handsome. No matter what, don't even think of leaving this palace. After a long time, he finally faintly said this sentence. Suddenly, he hugged Hellion way tightly and absorbed her thin body temperature. His eyes, which held power over the world, carried a rare sense of desolation. Night fell bit by bit. The wind was blowing on all sides of the mountain peak, bringing with it a bone-piercing chill. At this time, there was no sound in the surroundings of the defense general's residence. Except for Hellion Jiaoer's defeated cry, "Mother, what should I do? This time I have nothing. Marrying Huayan, that eunuch, I'd rather die." But what could she do? It was fine if the order was given by the royal family. Since Hellion Jiaoer came back, the Huai family blocked the entrance of the defense general's residence, saying that they wanted to marry the bride. Being forced to this point, Hellion Jiaoer could only marry over to shut the mouths of the people. There was no other way. Madame Su gritted her teeth. She hated Hellion Vivian to the extreme, but she could not think of anything. Hellion Guangyao looked at this pair of mother and daughter, his eyes narrowed again and again. Originally, he didn't want to get involved in this matter, but now that he didn't, his beloved daughter would really be ruined. This was not the main reason. All along, Hellion Guangyao had hoped that Hellion Jiaoer could marry into a good family, so he took care of her since she was young. Now all of it was ruined. If he did not take action, that girl might really ride on his head. This was something that Hellion Guangyao could not tolerate. He pondered for a long time and said in a heavy tone, "Jiaoer is the reincarnation of the Phoenix girl. Whether she marries well will also affect the four great families. Madam, send someone to the sacrificial spiritual hall now and let the elders come forward to persuade the Huai family. As long as the Huai family takes the initiative to break off the engagement, I, Hellion Guangyao, will give them satisfactory compensation." "You mean to let the Huai family break off the engagement?" Madame Su was stunned. "But in this way, won't our family's Jiaoer become a girl whose engagement is broken off?" Hellion Guangyao glanced at her. "This is the only thing we can do now. Breaking off the engagement is better than marrying into the Huai family. What's more, even if the engagement was broken off, there's still a dozen or so days before I can truly control the entire Hellion clan. Jiao Er is my Hellion Guangyao's daughter, and with the support of the four great clans, who wouldn't want to marry her in the future?" Su Yenemo thought about it and immediately called someone over, carefully exhorting a few words, then said, "Old master, I really don't understand why Wei Wei is always against our Jiaoer, causing her to be so terrible every time. As her mother, I feel angry and indignant in my heart, but I can't do anything to her. Old master once said that we must keep her alive. After all, even a vicious tiger will not eat its cubs. But I see Wei Wei's attitude. She hates us to the extreme and wants to make us unhappy everywhere. I heard from my brother, not only has Jiaoer become like this, even the Su family's business in Jiangnan has been ruined by that girl. Old master, you can't let her go like this anymore." "Yes, father, you can't indulge her like this anymore." Hellion Jiaoer cried pitifully. "It's not enough for her to hurt third sister, she also wants to hurt me. All day long she thinks about how badly you treat her, but she doesn't think that if it wasn't for father she would have starved to death on the side of the road. In fact, I don't want to blame eldest sister for these things, but eldest sister is really too much of a bully." "I know." Hellion Guangyao raised his eyes. "You've said before that the girl's body was taken over by someone else. I've always kept this matter in mind. I've also contacted someone to help me investigate. There's already news from that side. She has also entered the White Academy. As for the rest, didn't that girl want to participate in the family meeting? I have long planned. It is easy to bribe a few elders, not to mention that I am the only one who may have the military seal. Even if that girl has the support of the third prince, it is useless. You just wait and see how she will be isolated from the family meeting that day, thinking that she can rely on her fists and martial chi to get the position? I won't give her the chance." Su Yenemo heard this and laughed happily. I knew that old master has the best ideas. That little bastard wants to take back the general's residence. No way. Chapter 331. The Hellion Jiaoer finally stopped crying when she saw the solution. Sure enough, the 4 influential families stepped in. The Huai residents did not say anything since their son had already married a daughter-in-law from the Hellion family. Only a fool would not take the money when it was offered. They ordered the bridal escort to retreat from the defense general's residence. However, the Hellion Jiaoer was still unhappy. She had fallen from being the most talented girl in the capital to someone whose engagement was broken off, and her father had to give so much money to the other party. How could she take this lying down? However, mother, you have underestimated the third prince. He was not affected by Yun Biluo at all. Did we make the wrong move? Su Yenmo patted her hand, who said that he was not affected? Think about it carefully. If there was someone around you for so many years, disappearing and coming back just like that, you would definitely be unhappy. Look at this time, the third prince obviously did not forget about Yun Biluo. Since he did not forget, there is hope for everything. The Hellion Jiaoer bit her lip as she listened, but mother, you don't know. The third prince always sided with that little bitch Hellion Vivian to avenge her. I am worried, Jiao. Su Yenmo's tone was indifferent. She is the third princess consort. You have not thought it through this time and challenged the third princess consort's authority in front of others. The emperor's authority is not something that can be casually said. A person like the third prince will not allow anyone to belittle his chosen princess consort. The Hellion Jiaoer took a deep breath unwillingly. Then mother, what do you think I should do? You don't have to go to the academy during this period of time. It's not suitable for me to attend gatherings in the capital recently. Wait until your father truly removes that little bastard from the family, then everything will be better. Su Yenmo stroked Hellion Jiaoer's long hair and looked at Hellion Guangyao. Some time ago her business was in a mess and she did not have much money on hand. However, she did not know what Hellion Guangyao was doing recently. She had a feeling that he was hiding something from her. Perhaps it was because she was too paranoid. When she went to see those madams for a few days in a row, she felt that they had something to say. That feeling of being pointed at and gossiped about really made her feel uncomfortable. He wanted to have a good talk with Hellion Guangyao, but he could not find the time. They had just finished discussing this matter. Then someone whispered something in Hellion Guangyao's ear. Hellion Guangyao stood up and said to the Hellion Jiaoer and Su Yenmo, I still have matters to attend to in the imperial court. I'll take my leave first. Su Yenmo hurriedly escorted him out. The steward followed beside Hellion Guangyao. Seeing that they could no longer see the entrance of the general's residence, he blurted out his worries. Old master, Miss Lien Er's injury should be fine. It's better for you to accompany Madame and Miss at this time. If the Su family finds out, I'm afraid the situation will be disadvantageous to you. Hellion Guangyao thought about it for a moment, then retracted the foot that was about to step out. I'll listen to you, I'll take a stroll back to the manor. Yes. The two of them really did take a stroll. When Hellion Guangyao returned, Su Yenmo was still awake. She was pleasantly surprised to see him and wanted to talk to him. However, Hellion Guangyao looked very tired, so Su Yenmo could only give up. Thinking that she would be able to deal with Hellion Vivian soon, she felt a burst of joy in her heart and closed her eyes not long after. However, what she did not know was that Hellion Guangyao was not asleep. Instead, he was full of thoughts, but those thoughts were not in her heart at all. The night deepened a little. Beligaju sat on the rattan chair, holding his chin with one hand, casually flipping through the scroll in his hand. Do you want to know where Heizhu went? Bai Mei did not understand why His Highness suddenly mentioned Heizhu, but she felt that the atmosphere was a little wrong and her whole body was a little cold. Beligaju turned another page of the scroll and said, Show her the thing. Bai Mei heard this, turned around and saw Heizhu's pale face. She suddenly panicked and with a bang she knelt on the ground. Chapter 332. Your Highness, Bai Mei wanted to explain. Bailey Jiaju coldly glanced at her and said, You good sisters have just met, why are you still so nervous? As a death attendant she was not afraid of death, but she was afraid of Beligaju at this moment. She was a little regretful, regretting that she acted on her own accord before. I have overestimated your IQ. Bailey Jiaju looked at her with a slight smile, but his smile did not reach his eyes. She is my prey. Usually I can't bear to let her get hurt, but you guys are good making her think about how to leave me. After hearing this, Bai Mei's breath froze and she tried to explain, I thought Sister Yun was the one who, bang. Bai Mei did not finish her words. Baligaju waved his sleeve and threw her more than a meter away. Bai Mei coughed in pain and blood flowed out from the corner of her mouth. Baligaju acted as if he did not see it and stood up slowly. How is the situation at the general's residence? Reporting to your highness, the people at the Huai residence have accepted the money from the 4 influential families and cancelled the marriage with Hellion Jiaoer, Shadow said as he gave a look to the people beside him. The shadow guards bowed their heads and carried the half-dead Bai Mei away. From now on, they understood the principle of seeing the princess consort as if she was seeing his highness. Baligaju listened to Shadow's report and smiled evilly. Cancelling the marriage? The Huai residence dares to cancel the marriage that I granted? How dare they? Shadow lowered his head. Of course they have the guts. They know that master is not to be trifled with, but they still made the decision at this time. Hand over the evidence of the Huai residence's corruption over the years to the retired emperor. Since the Huai residence does not want to hold a wedding, let them hold a funeral. Baligaju said very lightly. Shadow could imagine how miserable the Huai residence would be in the future. What about the general's residence? Let Lan Lian continue. Hellion Guangyao won't be able to hold on much longer. At this point, Baligaju sneered, that woman's methods are still a little too soft. Of course, when dealing with people like Su Yenimo, an eye for an eye. The Fire Qilin didn't want to say it, but it couldn't hold it in anymore. Master, no one in this world is more despicable than you. Really? Sending a death attendant to seduce Hellion Guangyao was something only its master could think of. It was so sinister. Baligaju raised his eyebrows and glanced at it. The fire unicorn shrunk its big head in fear. What I mean is, why did you get involved in this kind of thing? It was obvious that it disdained fighting between humans the most. Baligaju put the book in his hand on the wooden table. As a qualified host, of course I have to know how to feed it. So, was it because of Hellion Vivian? When I was your prey you never fed me. The fire unicorn stretched its neck to fight for its own benefits. Bailey Jiaju glanced at it faintly. Didn't I feed you vegetables? I'm a carnivore. The fire unicorn couldn't help but want to roar. But Baligaju was obviously tired of it and was about to cut off the stream of consciousness. The fire unicorn hurriedly stopped him. Wait. Master, I think you should tell Miss Vivian about this. Otherwise, if you do so much and she doesn't know about it, wouldn't it be a waste? Sigh, a master who has never been in love, even this kind of thing has to worry about it. In this world, there is absolutely no second mythical beast that is more versatile than him. Master, think about it, if Miss Vivian knows about this news, she will definitely be very touched. When a woman is touched, she will throw herself into your arms. The fire unicorn kept talking about its point of view. Usually, Baligaju would have shut it up by now, but today he listened to the whole story.